The sun hung low over the Arizona desert, painting the rocky landscape in shades of amber and crimson. A stagecoach rumbled along the dusty trail, its wooden wheels kicking up clouds that lingered in the still air. Inside, passengers swayed with each bump and dip, while Ethan Calloway sat silently in the corner, his weathered face impassive. The scars on his hands, small, precise marks that came not from labor, but from a surgeon's errors, remained hidden beneath leather gloves despite the heat. The first shot came without warning. A sharp crack split the air, followed by a driver's cry cut suddenly short. The stagecoach lurched violently. Before anyone could react, riders emerged from the rocky outcroppings, 5 men with bandanas covering their faces, rifles aimed at the coach. "Everyone out! Hands where we can see 'em!" the leader shouted. Chaos erupted inside. A young woman began to sob while her husband attempted to shield her. An elderly woman clutched her handbag tighter, her knuckles white with fear. As the passengers were forced outside, one of the bandits grew impatient with the elderly woman's slow movements. He yanked her roughly from the coach, sending her sprawling. Her handbag fell open, revealing medicine bottles and a folded letter. "Please," she gasped, reaching for a small blue bottle. "I need my medicine." The bandit kicked it further, laughing. Something shifted in Ethan's eyes, a flicker of something long buried. The leader demanded valuables while his men held guns on the passengers. When the young woman screamed as her wedding band was wrenched from her finger, her husband lunged forward. A shot rang out and he collapsed, blood blossoming across his shirt. "He'll die without help," the elderly woman cried. "That's his problem," the leader spat, though uncertainty edged his voice. Ethan stepped forward, his movements so deliberate that even the armed men paused. "I can help him." The leader's gun swiveled toward him. "Stay back." "He has minutes before he bleeds out," Ethan said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who knew death intimately. "You want a robbery or a hanging offense? Your choice." A tense moment passed before the leader nodded curtly. Ethan knelt beside the wounded man, removing his gloves to reveal hands that moved with practiced precision despite years of disuse. "My bag, inside the coach." When his weathered medical bag was retrieved, the prospector's eyes widened. "You a doctor, mister?" Ethan didn't answer. From his bag, he withdrew instruments that hadn't seen use in years, yet his fingers remembered their purpose. He worked to extract the bullet and close the wound with efficiency that spoke of extensive training and experience. When it was done, the young husband lay unconscious but stable. The bandits, having collected their spoils, mounted their horses. "Who are you?" the leader asked. Ethan wiped blood from his hands. "Nobody important." As the dust from the departing bandits settled, the young wife whispered, "You saved his life." Ethan was already repacking his medical bag, closing it with a finality that spoke of reluctance to have opened it at all. "Keep the wound clean. Find a real doctor when you reach Silverhorn." Before anyone could ask more questions, he collected his few belongings and began walking eastward along the trail. "Where are you going?" the elderly woman called after him. "The town's 20 miles from here." But Ethan Calloway was already receding into the shimmering heat, a solitary figure against the vast, unforgiving landscape. 2 days later, Ethan walked into Silverhorn, a mining town bustling with activity. The main street was lined with hastily constructed wooden buildings, saloons outnumbering all other establishments. Construction on the north side revealed the beginnings of what would become the train station, workers swarming over the site. Inside the Red Mountain Saloon, Ethan found a corner spot at the bar, ordered whiskey, and began his silent observation. A habit formed during the war when assessing wounded meant the difference between who might be saved and who was beyond help. His attention was drawn to a commotion at a table near the center. A woman in her early 40s with auburn hair, pulled back severely, stood surrounded by 3 men. Despite being outnumbered, her chin remained high, her posture defiant. "I merely reported what I observed, gentlemen," she was saying, her educated accent marking her as not local. "If you take issue with the facts, that's hardly my concern." "Facts?" A surveyor leaned closer. "You calling sacred government treaties thinly veiled land grabs ain't facts, ma'am. That's the kind of talk that stirs up trouble. The kind of talk that costs honest men jobs," added a railroad worker. The third man, better dressed than his companions, placed a hand on the table deliberately. Miss Montgomery, Silverhorn is a town of opportunity. Progress. We'd hate to see your journalistic endeavors create unnecessary complications. The woman gathered her papers. I find threats to be tedious, Mr. Harrington, particularly when delivered by a railroad company representative who can't even identify himself honestly to his interview subject. When Harrington's hand closed around her wrist, Ethan found himself moving before conscious decision took hold. He approached their table with an unhurried gait. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You mentioned you'd be interested in local testimonials for your article. I've been in these parts longer than most." 4 pairs of eyes turned to him. 3 hostile, 1 surprised but quickly understanding. "Why, yes," she recovered smoothly. "I'd be most interested in your perspective, Mr. Calloway, Ethan Calloway." Harrington hadn't released her wrist. "This is a private conversation." "Doesn't look private," Ethan observed mildly. "Looks like 3 men crowding a lady who's trying to leave." "This isn't your concern, stranger," the surveyor said, rising. Ethan didn't move, but something in his eyes, a coldness that spoke of battlefields and hard decisions, made the surveyor hesitate. "I've found," Ethan said quietly, "that a man's grip on a woman's arm against her will is everyone's concern in civilized company." His gaze dropped to where Harrington still held Miss Montgomery's wrist. "Unless Silverhorn isn't civilized." Harrington released his hold with exaggerated casualness. "We were just concluding our business anyway." They left the saloon together, only stopping when they'd turned down a side street. "Thank you for your intervention, though I assure you I've handled worse." She extended her hand. "Eleanor Montgomery. Most call me Nell." Ethan shook her hand briefly. "You're welcome. You don't strike me as a man who involves himself in others' affairs. May I ask why you made an exception?" 3 against 1 seemed poor odds. A smile touched her lips. "I'm researching medicinal plants used by the Apache. Comparative studies with Western medical approaches. I'd value any insights." Ethan's posture stiffened. "I'm just passing through, ma'am. Don't know much about plants or Indians." "A pity." She nodded toward his hands. "Those are a surgeon's hands. I recognized the precision when you gestured. Military surgeon, I'd wager, given your bearing. You're observant. Professional necessity." She withdrew a small notebook. "I'm staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house if you reconsider." "Good day, Mr. Calloway." Dawson's General Store occupied a prime location near the center of Silverhorn's main street. Inside, the store was crowded with merchandise from nails to fabric, ammunition to canned peaches. Walter Dawson stood behind the counter, a man with thinning hair and an expansive belly. He was engaged in conversation with a well-dressed gentleman whose polished boots marked him as someone who gave orders rather than followed them. "Finest collection this side of Tucson," Dawson was saying, gesturing toward a display case containing native artifacts. "All authentic Apache pieces." The gentleman examined a stone knife. "And you guarantee their authenticity?" "On my mother's grave, Colonel Reed." Dawson's smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "I have additional items of special interest in the back room if you're looking for something particular." Reed straightened. "Perhaps later. The railroad company is primarily concerned with practical matters. Speaking of which, have you engaged a translator yet?" Dawson's expression shifted. "I've put out inquiries. Good interpreters are scarce, and those who know Apache dialects scarcer still." Ethan approached the counter only when Reed had left. As Dawson tallied his purchases, Ethan's gaze drifted to a door behind the counter, slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of a storeroom. A movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting, followed by the clink of metal. "Looking for anything special?" Dawson asked, following his gaze. "Just these," Ethan replied. When Dawson turned, Ethan caught another glimpse through the door, this time of a human figure moving in the shadows. The silhouette appeared feminine, and the metallic sound came again. "Chains." Dawson completed the transaction, then called after him. "Say, you look like a man who's been around. Ever do any trading with the Indians?" "No." "Shame, I'm always in the market for authentic pieces. Between us, there's more money in Apache medicine objects than arrowheads. Anything with symbols or that looks like it might be used in their healing rituals fetches 3 times what a weapon would." "Why's that?" "Some pharmaceutical company back east thinks the savages might actually know something worthwhile about local plants. Dawson shrugged. Seems far-fetched, but I'm happy to profit from the delusion. That evening, Ethan returned to Dawson's store. He watched from across the street as the shopkeeper closed up, then waited until the street had quieted before approaching the rear entrance. The storeroom was dark, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through a small window. In a small alcove, partially concealed by stacked crates, huddled on a thin pallet, was a young Apache woman. She was perhaps in her early 20s, her long black hair falling in tangles around a face that, despite evident exhaustion, held a dignity that transcended her circumstances. A metal shackle encircled one ankle, chaining her to the wall. When she saw Ethan, she didn't cry out. Instead, she drew herself up, dark eyes meeting his with defiance. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ethan said quietly, remaining where he stood. The woman's expression didn't change. If she understood English, she gave no indication. As he looked at the chained woman, memories surfaced unbidden. A different time, different captives, and his own silence that had allowed atrocities to unfold. Before he could reconsider, Ethan knelt and examined the shackle. When it fell open, the woman's eyes widened slightly. "Can you walk?" Ethan asked. She stood in one fluid motion, revealing that her captivity hadn't lasted long enough to weaken her physically. They moved through shadows until they reached the edge of town. The woman watched silently as Ethan collected his few belongings from an abandoned shed. He offered her jerky from his supplies, which she accepted with a slight nod. "My name is Ethan," he said, touching his chest before pointing to her questioningly. After a long moment she spoke, her voice low and melodic despite its firmness. "Nahimana, you speak English." "When necessary." Her accent was slight but noticeable. "Dawson, the storekeeper, he was keeping you prisoner. He bought me from hunters who said they found me wandering. They lied. They attacked my party while we gathered plants." "Why did he chain you?" "He discovered I understood English when he spoke of selling me to the railroad men as an interpreter." Her chin lifted slightly. "I refused." "Where will you go now?" "Home. To my people." She studied him with penetrating intensity. "Why did you help me?" "Didn't seem right," he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Simple words. "But I think there is nothing simple about you, Ethan." They set out under the star-filled sky, heading eastward away from town. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when the sound of approaching horses brought them to a halt in the shadow of a rock formation. "Patrol," Nahimana whispered. "They search for Apache who leave the reservation." "Are you from the reservation?" She shook her head. "My people never surrendered. We live free in the mountains." The revelation complicated matters. Helping an escaped prisoner was one thing. Harboring a hostile Apache would be viewed as treason by the army. As dawn approached, Ethan led them to a secluded wash where cottonwood trees provided shade and concealment. Nahimana collected several plant specimens, studying them with knowledgeable interest. "You know plants, medicines," Ethan observed. "I am a healer for my people. I was gathering medicines when I was taken." The storekeeper mentioned interest from back east, in Apache medicine. Something flickered across Nahimana's face. "Many seek our knowledge now. For money, not healing." "And what were you seeking when you were captured?" "Plants that fight fever. Sickness came to our children after the last rains." When evening approached, Nahimana whispered urgently, "Riders, not soldiers, men who hunt bounty." Ethan came fully alert, listening to the approaching horses. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. They track us." "Not possible. We left no trail." "Dawson would pay well to have me returned. These men are skilled trackers." "There's a cave system to the north," Ethan said. "If we can reach it, we can lose them in the tunnels." They moved rapidly through the twilight landscape. The sound of pursuit grew closer as they approached the foothills. When they reached the first outcroppings that marked the cave entrances, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet struck rock inches from Ethan's head. They ducked into a narrow passage that descended steeply into darkness. When they had gone perhaps 50 yards, the passage widened into a chamber, where a crack in the ceiling allowed fading daylight to penetrate. "They will come," Nahimana said softly. "The one who leads them knows these caves. How can you be sure?" "I heard his voice, Silas Blackwood. He hunts Apache for army bounties." The name struck Ethan like a physical blow. Silas Blackwood, a name from the past he'd spent years trying to outrun. A man who had been present on the worst day of Ethan's life. "You know this man," Nahimana observed. "We've met," Ethan acknowledged, his tone revealing nothing. They continued deeper into the cave system. After nearly an hour, they reached a chamber where underground water had created a small pool. "Your shoulder is injured," Nahimana said unexpectedly. Ethan stiffened. "It's nothing. The rock fragments when they shot. You were hit." Her fingers found the torn fabric of his shirt and the warm wetness beneath. "You bleed. It's just a graze. Even small wounds become dangerous if infected. Remove your shirt." Ethan complied reluctantly. In the darkness, he felt Nahimana examining the injury, her touch clinical yet surprisingly gentle. "Not deep," she confirmed, "but needs cleaning." She pressed a damp cloth to his shoulder, then applied something with an unfamiliar herbal scent. "What is that?" he asked. "Medicine I carried when captured. Will prevent infection and help healing." Her fingers worked with practiced efficiency, applying the substance before binding the wound with a strip of cloth torn from her dress. "Thank you," he said finally. "I am a healer," Nahimana replied simply. "As were you once, Wasam." Ethan tensed. "What makes you say that?" "Your hands, they have knowledge in them. The way you move them. Careful, like they remember holding lives." The observation hit uncomfortably close to truth. "You're imagining things." "I don't think so. You have healer's eyes, too. They see beneath the surface." The quiet was broken by distant sounds. Their pursuers, still searching the cave network. Ethan's hand moved to his revolver. "There's another way out," he whispered. "A passage that leads to a canyon to the east." They moved cautiously through interconnecting chambers. When they reached a junction of 3 passages, Ethan paused, trying to recall which would lead toward the exit. Nahimana touched his arm. "Left passage," she whispered with certainty. "How do you know?" "Feel the air. It moves from outside." The passage narrowed, then widened again, leading upward. As they climbed, a faint lightening of the darkness suggested approaching dawn. Suddenly, a shout came from behind them. "There! I see movement!" A rifle shot cracked through the cavern. Ethan pushed Nahimana ahead toward the exit, turning to fire his revolver at their pursuers. They emerged onto a ledge partway up a steep canyon wall. Below, a dry river wound between towering red stone formations. "Up or down?" Ethan asked urgently. "Down, then north through the canyon. There are places to hide." They began descending rapidly. Behind them, a man appeared at the cave mouth, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and a battered cavalry hat. "That's far enough, Doc." The voice echoed across the canyon. "We just want the girl. No need for you to die today." They reached the canyon floor as their pursuers began their own descent. Nahimana led them northward, then suddenly veered into what appeared to be a solid rock face, a narrow fissure nearly invisible unless viewed from the exact right angle. The side canyon twisted through the stone landscape, eventually opening into a secluded box canyon with enough moisture to support trees and undergrowth. Nahimana led him to a sheltered area beneath an overhanging rock. "We rest here," she decided. "They will search this main canyon for hours before finding this place, if they ever do." Ethan sank down, his shoulder throbbing. "You know this area well," he observed. "These are my people's lands. I have walked them since childhood." "And Blackwood, you know him too." Her expression hardened. "He hunts Apache for bounties. Many of my people have died by his hand." She studied Ethan's face carefully. "But you know him differently. He called you Doc." "That was a long time ago." "Not so long, I think. The past is never as far behind us as we wish." As she rested, Ethan found his mind returning to Silas Blackwood and the memories his appearance dragged to the surface. 8 years had passed since their last encounter, a blood-soaked day when Ethan had discovered the true purpose of the medical unit he'd been assigned to. Not to treat wounded soldiers as he'd believed, but to serve as cover for a mission with darker intent. After perhaps an hour, Nahimana stirred. She sat up, listening intently before apparently determining they remained safe. "Your wound needs tending again," she said, moving closer to examine his shoulder. The makeshift bandage was soaked through with blood. Despite Ethan's protest, she carefully removed it and examined the wound in the better light of day. "Stone fragments remain inside. They must be removed or infection will come." From a small pouch concealed in her dress, She withdrew dried plant material, crushing it between her fingers before mixing it with water. This will numb the area, she explained. When it takes effect, I will remove the fragments. What plant is that? Ethan asked. You call it Jimmy weed. We call it Tulipai kade. It dulls pain when prepared correctly. Combined with these, she indicated small dried berries, it prevents the blood from flowing too freely. Like yarrow or witch hazel in Western medicine. Nahimana nodded. Many plants serve the same purpose across different traditions. The earth provides similar medicines wherever people live. As the pain in his shoulder receded, Nahimana produced a slender bone tool and began removing stone fragments from the wound with delicate precision. You were trained in healing, Ethan observed, since childhood. My grandmother was a healer before me and her mother before her. The knowledge passes down. Like medical school, but longer training. Yes, much longer. We begin as children, learning plants first, then the body, then the spirit. All three must be treated together for true healing. Western medicine is beginning to recognize that connection, Ethan said, though most doctors still focus exclusively on the physical. As did you? Nahimana's question was posed casually, but her eyes flicked to his face with keen interest. I was a military surgeon. We didn't have time for spiritual considerations in field hospitals. Yet you noticed them anyway. It wasn't a question, but an observation. A sound from the main canyon drew their attention. Voices carried on the breeze. Their pursuers had not given up. Nahimana quickly finished cleaning the wound and applied a fresh poultice. We should move soon, Ethan said quietly. They'll eventually find this place. When darkness comes, there is a route eastward through these canyons that few know. It leads to safer territory. Your people's territory? Her eyes met his, measuring, judging. Yes, but I cannot take you there directly. It is forbidden for outsiders to know the way. Ethan understood. You can point me in another direction when we're clear of Blackwood and his men. I could, she agreed, but that is not what I wish to do. What do you wish? Nahimana was silent for a long moment. You have risked your life to help me. Among my people, such a debt must be repaid. She met his eyes directly. I will take you to a place where you can rest safely while your wound heals. Then, if you are willing, I would ask your help in return. What kind of help? Ethan asked cautiously. My people face sickness that our traditional medicines are not defeating. Children die. Emotion flickered behind her composed expression. Your knowledge, combined with ours, might save them. The request struck at the core of Ethan's carefully constructed isolation. For years, he had avoided using his medical skills, except in the most dire emergencies. I haven't practiced medicine in years, he said. Yet your hands remember, Nahimana replied, as does your mind. These things do not leave us, even when we wish they would. You need not answer now. First, we must reach safety. The conversation was interrupted by the scrape of boot on stone. Someone had found the hidden entrance to their sanctuary. Ethan drew his revolver while Nahimana gathered their possessions. They moved deeper into the vegetation as three men entered the canyon. A lean scout, a broader man with hard eyes, and the unmistakable silhouette of Silas Blackwood. Spread out, Blackwood ordered. They're still here. I can feel it. As the men searched, Ethan tensed, ready to fire if discovered. Nahimana silently withdrew a small but wickedly sharp knife. Just as discovery seemed inevitable, a shout came from the canyon entrance. Riders coming up the main canyon. At least a dozen. Moving fast. Blackwood cursed. Military patrol. Fall back to the horses. Within moments, all three men had disappeared, leaving Ethan and Nahimana in their hiding place. The soldiers will not help us, she whispered. They hunt my people as eagerly as Blackwood does. Nahimana led them to a nearly invisible crack that widened into a passage barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. This leads to a higher canyon. From there, we can move eastward without being seen from below. The passage twisted upward for perhaps 30 feet before opening onto a ledge. From this vantage point, they could see a patrol of cavalry soldiers moving through the main canyon below. Now we wait, Nahimana said, settling into a sheltered position. Let them hunt each other while we rest. From her diminishing supply of medicinal materials, She extracted dried leaves for Ethan to chew. It will dull the pain without clouding your mind. As he chewed, the pain began to recede. Remarkable, he murmured. What is it? You call it white sage, but this variety grows only in hidden canyons with specific soil. My people have cultivated it for generations, strengthening its properties. Selective breeding, Ethan nodded. Western botany is just beginning to understand the process. We have understood it since before your people came to these lands. There was no rancor in her statement, merely a statement of fact. Many plants you now discover for medicine, we have known for centuries. The conversation drifted into botanical and medical topics as they waited. Despite their circumstances, Ethan found himself engaged with an intellectual interest he hadn't experienced in years. When the patrol finally departed, Nahimana led them along precarious pathways that wound through the canyon system. Routes that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. By dawn, they had left the canyon system behind, entering rolling foothills covered in scrub and scattered juniper trees. We are beyond their usual hunting grounds now, Nahimana said as they rested. But still we must be careful. As they shared the last of Ethan's supplies, Nahimana studied him. You move like a soldier, but think like a healer. It is an unusual combination. War makes strange combinations of everyone it touches. Nahimana nodded. This is true. My people have been at war for generations now. Each of us carries its mark differently. How has it marked you? Ethan found himself asking. She looked away. It took my mother when I was young. She was a healer too. After she was killed, I became the keeper of her knowledge before I was ready. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. It was many years ago, during a time when soldiers attacked our village, seeking those who had raided white settlements. Her eyes studied his face carefully. It was not the first massacre of my people, nor the last. They continued eastward as the sun rose. By early afternoon, they had reached a series of smaller canyons cut into the mountainside. Nahimana led them into what appeared to be a dead-end ravine but actually concealed a narrow path that switched back up the cliff face. The path eventually leveled out, revealing a small plateau hidden from view from below. Here, a cluster of junipers surrounded a natural spring. We rest here, Nahimana announced. It is safe. Few know of this place. Exhaustion finally overcame Ethan's habitual vigilance. As Nahimana prepared a new poultice for his wound, he didn't resist, too tired to maintain his usual aversion to being tended. The healing begins well, she observed. No signs of infection. Your medicine works, Ethan acknowledged, combined with your body's strength. But now you must truly rest. Sleep. I will keep watch. Ethan drifted into deeper sleep than he had allowed himself in years. The combination of exhaustion, medicine, and an unexpected sense of security overcoming the vigilance that had defined his existence since the war. He dreamed of a village of brush-roofed dwellings surrounded by mountains painted red by sunset. Yet even in the dream, Ethan remained an observer, unable to cross the invisible barrier between himself and the life unfolding before him. When he tried to move closer, the scene shifted, darkened. Soldiers appeared, weapons raised. Ethan tried to shout warnings, to prevent what he knew would follow, but no sound emerged. He was forced to watch again, as destruction descended on innocence. Blood stained the earth. Screams replaced laughter. And in the midst of chaos, a woman fell. A healer with knowledge in her hands, struck down while trying to save a child. Behind her stood a younger version of himself, medical bag in hand, too late to help, too late to stop what others had set in motion. And beside the fallen woman, a young girl, watching with eyes that would remember everything. Ethan awoke with a gasp. He sat up abruptly, his wounded shoulder protesting the movement. Nahimana sat nearby, watching him with an unreadable expression. You were dreaming, she said simply. Ethan nodded, unwilling to discuss the content of his dream. You called out a name, Nahimana continued, her tone careful. Mangas. Ethan froze. The name hung between them, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years, but that had haunted his conscience. Mangas Coloradas, the Apache leader whose village had been the site of the massacre that had finally broken Ethan's faith in the military he served. You knew my grandfather, Nahimana said, the statement revealing what she had suspected, perhaps all along. Ethan stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The proud bearing, the intelligence, the authority she carried naturally. The granddaughter of Mangas Coloradas, the legendary Apache chief. I never met him, Ethan said finally, his voice rough. I was sent to his village after soldiers attacked it. I was told we were going to treat wounded from a battle, but there had been no battle, only slaughter. You were the doctor who came with soldiers but refused to fight, the one who tried to help survivors. There were few to help by the time we arrived. The admission felt torn from him. I was too late to stop anything. But you tried. Nahimana moved closer, her gaze intent. My mother was among those you tried to save. I watched you work to close her wounds, even when other soldiers wanted to leave. The revelation struck Ethan like a physical blow. The young girl from his dream, the one who watched as he failed to save the healer, had been Nahimana herself. I failed, he said, the words bitter. She died anyway. Yes, Nahimana's voice carried no accusation, only acknowledgement of truth. But you showed respect to her body afterward. You covered her face. You spoke words of sorrow. These things matter to my people. Is that why you helped me? Nahimana asked. Because you recognize me. No, Ethan answered truthfully. I didn't recognize you until now. I helped you because it seemed like the right thing to do, a small balance against all the wrong I've witnessed. Nahimana led him to the edge of the plateau where the view opened eastward across miles of wilderness. Among distant mountains, a distinctive mesa with red coloring stood out. There, Nahimana pointed, that is where my people now live. The place we moved to after the massacre. A sacred place hidden from those who would do us harm. Why show me this? I thought outsiders weren't permitted to know your people's location. Because I believe the spirits have brought us together for a purpose. My people suffer from a sickness our medicines cannot fully heal, a disease brought by white traders that attacks the lungs of our children. She gestured toward the mesa. My father is now chief. He has sought help from other tribes, even sent people to the white man's doctor on the reservation. Nothing has worked. Children still die. Her eyes held his with unwavering intensity. But you, a healer who once tried to help us, who carries the knowledge of white medicine but respects our ways, perhaps you were meant to come. I do not ask this lightly. My people have every reason to mistrust those with white skin. But they will listen to me, and perhaps in helping us, you may find healing for your own spirit as well. Ethan turned away, looking back toward the wilderness they had traversed, the world of white settlements he had been drifting through without purpose or connection. I'll consider it, he said finally. We will rest here tonight. Tomorrow you will decide. As darkness settled over their mountain sanctuary, Ethan found himself at a crossroads he had never anticipated. Behind lay years of purposeless wandering. Ahead lay something entirely different, a deliberate return to medicine, to responsibility, to engagement with the very people whose suffering had once driven him from his calling. The choice before him was not merely about helping Nahimana's tribe. It was about whether he would continue to run from his past or finally turn to face it, whether the hands that had once failed to save a healer might now save her people instead. Dawn broke over the mountain plateau in gentle waves of amber and gold. Ethan woke to find Nahimana already moving about their small camp, gathering water from the spring and checking the surrounding area for signs of pursuit. The night had passed without incident, giving him the first truly restful sleep he'd experienced in years. His shoulder felt better, the throbbing reduced to a dull ache. When he examined the wound, he found the inflammation had subsided significantly, the edges already beginning to knit together in a way that spoke to the efficacy of Nahimana's herbal treatments. Your medicine works well, he said as she returned from her reconnaissance. The body knows how to heal itself. Medicine only clears the path. She knelt beside him, examining the wound with clinical interest. Today we can travel if you are strong enough. Ethan nodded, rising to his feet to test his strength. The movement sent a twinge through his injured shoulder, but nothing he couldn't manage. Years of pushing through discomfort had taught him the difference between pain that signaled danger and pain that merely demanded acknowledgement. I'm ready, he said, but before we go, I need to know more about what I'm walking into. If I'm to help your people, I need to understand the sickness. Nahimana settled cross-legged near the spring, her expression growing serious. It begins with fever and dry cough. Then the breathing becomes difficult, as if something heavy sits on the chest. The young ones suffer most. Some recover, but many grow weaker until their breath fails entirely. The description was familiar to Ethan, reminiscent of several respiratory diseases he'd encountered during his medical career. How long has this been happening? 3 moons now. It came after traders visited a settlement near our territory. They brought cloth and metal goods, but also this invisible enemy. Likely influenza or pneumonia, Ethan mused aloud. Possibly tuberculosis, though the progression seems too rapid. He ran a hand through his beard, mind already shifting into diagnostic patterns long unused. Have you tried steam treatments? Herbs that open the breathing passages? All our traditional remedies, sage smoke, pine infusions, sweat lodges, followed by cool baths. Some improve, but then worsen again. Frustration edged her voice. Even our strongest medicine seems to fight this sickness to a standstill, not defeat it. Ethan considered this information carefully. Without proper examination tools, definitive diagnosis would be challenging. Yet the possibility of helping, of using his medical knowledge for genuine healing, rather than merely patching soldiers to send back to battle, stirred something within him that had lain dormant for too long. I'll need supplies, he said finally. My bag contains basic instruments, but not enough medicines for treating multiple patients. What do you need? Quinine, and if it's available, willow bark extract, clean bandages, alcohol for sterilization. He paused, considering. And I'll need to see how your people prepare their traditional medicines. The combination might be more effective than either approach alone. Nahimana's eyes widened slightly at his last statement, a subtle reaction, but significant from someone who maintains such careful control over her expressions. Most white doctors dismiss our ways as superstition, she observed. Most white doctors haven't spent years watching men die because medicine alone wasn't enough, Ethan replied, a shadow crossing his face. There's more to healing than stopping bleeding or fighting fever. The will to live matters. Belief matters. I've seen it too many times to deny it. Nahimana studied him for a long moment, then nodded with something like approval. We can find what you need in a trading post at the edge of our territory, a place where mixed bloods and friendly whites sometimes exchange goods with our people. They broke camp efficiently, erasing signs of their presence before beginning the journey eastward. Nahimana led them along hidden paths that wound through increasingly rugged terrain, routes that would be invisible to the untrained eye, but revealed themselves under her confident guidance. As they traveled, Ethan found himself watching Nahimana with new awareness. Knowing her true identity, granddaughter of the legendary Mangas Coloradas, daughter of a healer he had failed to save, cast her actions in a different light. Her initial wariness, her careful assessment of his character, her eventual decision to seek his help, all reflected not just personal judgment, but the weight of responsibility she carried for her people. Your father, Ethan ventured as they paused to drink from a clear stream. He became chief after your grandfather was killed? Not immediately. Nahimana's voice remained neutral, though the subject was clearly painful. My uncle led first. When he died in battle 3 winters ago, my father took his place. He is called Nantan Taza, Chief Strongheart. And he will accept my help, a white man? Nahimana looked up from the stream, her dark eyes holding his. He will question you closely. He will watch for deception. But if he believes your intention is truly to heal, not harm, he will accept any hand that might save our children. They continued onward through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they moved deeper into Apache territory. The sparse vegetation of the lower elevations gave way to pine forests and hidden meadows nestled between rocky outcroppings. Game trails became more numerous, though they saw no people, neither white settlers nor Apache. We are watched, Nahimana said quietly as they entered a narrow canyon in the late afternoon. My people's scouts have been tracking us for the past hour. Ethan had sensed nothing, no movement, no sound beyond natural forest noises, yet he didn't doubt her. Will they approach? When they are certain of our intentions. The answer came sooner than expected. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, 3 Apache warriors materialized from the shadows, armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted with red ochre streaks that emphasized stern expressions. They wore a combination of traditional buckskin and acquired clothing, evidence of a people adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining their identity. Nahimana stepped forward, addressing them in rapid Apache, a flowing musical language that Ethan couldn't understand. Her bearing changed subtly as she spoke, taking on an authority that seemed beyond her years. The warriors listened intently, their expressions shifting from suspicion to surprise to something more complex. One of them, older than the others, with gray streaks in his long black hair, stepped forward and examined Ethan with penetrating intensity. He spoke to Nahimana, his tone questioning. He asks if you are the medicine man who came after the massacre. Nahimana translated. Haska remembers you. He was a child then, hiding in the rocks. He saw you tend to the wounded. Ethan met the warrior's gaze directly. Yes, he said simply. I was there, too late to prevent what happened, but I tried to help those I could. After Nahimana translated, Haska spoke again, a longer statement this time. He says you closed his grandmother's eyes when she died. You placed a blanket over her with respect, not like the other soldiers who took trophies from the dead. He has remembered your face all these years. A memory surfaced in Ethan's mind. An elderly woman with gunshot wounds too severe to survive, her last breaths rattling as he knelt beside her. He had indeed covered her with a blanket afterward, a small gesture of dignity in the midst of overwhelming barbarism. Tell him I remember his grandmother's courage, Ethan said. She died without fear. When Nahimana translated this, something shifted in Haska's demeanor. He spoke again to his companions, then nodded to Nahimana. A decision had been made. They will escort us to the trading post, Nahimana explained. From there, we will send word to my father about your arrival. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, two taking the lead while Haska followed behind, a formation that offered both protection and subtle surveillance. They traveled swiftly through terrain that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Ethan's eyes, eventually emerging from the canyon into a hidden valley where a small collection of buildings stood near a creek. The trading post consisted of a main structure built of logs and adobe, a stable, and several smaller outbuildings. A weather-beaten sign above the door read, Mercer's Goods, in faded paint. Unlike most frontier trading posts, this one had no military presence visible, no cavalry patrols, no garrison. Instead, a mixture of Apache, Mexican, and a few white traders moved about the small settlement in a state of wary cooperation. James Mercer has traded fairly with my people for many years, Nahimana explained as they approached. He married a woman from the Chiricahua band and learned our ways. His post is neutral ground, no soldiers, no bounty hunters permitted. Inside the trading post, the expected collection of goods filled shelves and barrels, coffee, flour, ammunition, tools, and fabric. But Ethan also noted items less common in frontier establishments: books, microscopes, and glass-fronted cabinets containing botanical specimens and medicines. A tall man with graying red hair looked up from behind the counter. His weathered face broke into a smile of recognition when he saw Nahimana. Little Storm, he said in English, using what was clearly a familiar name. Your father has had scouts searching for you these past weeks. I was delayed, James. Nahimana's formal manner softened slightly. Troubles in Silverhorn. Mercer's eyes shifted to Ethan, assessment clear in his gaze. And you've brought company. This is Ethan Calloway, a healer. He has agreed to help with the sickness in our village. Interest replaced wariness in Mercer's expression. A doctor, are you? That's fortunate timing. The influenza's been hitting the tribes hard this season. Former Army surgeon, Ethan clarified, stepping forward to shake the trader's hand. I need supplies if I'm going to Cowboy of any use. Medicines primarily. Might have what you need. Mercer gestured toward the cabinet of medical supplies. Been stocking more since the sickness started. What exactly are you looking for? As Ethan listed his requirements, Mercer nodded and began collecting items from various shelves and drawers. Their conversation turned technical, discussing dosages and treatment protocols, while Nahimana conferred with Haska and the other warriors. Quinine I've got, though it's costly these days, Mercer said. Willow bark extract too. Alcohol, bandages, no problem. He paused, studying Ethan more carefully. You mentioned combining with traditional Apache treatments. Not many white doctors would consider that approach. I've seen enough death to know medicine isn't an absolute science, Ethan replied. Results matter more than method. Mercer seemed to approve of this answer. As he continued gathering his supplies, he lowered his voice. Word of warning, doctor. The situation at the village is complicated. The sickness has divided the tribe. Some blame white contact entirely and want to retreat deeper into isolation. Others recognize the need for outside medicine. Where does the chief stand? Nantantaza walks the middle path, as a good leader should. But his position is challenged by those who see any cooperation with whites as weakness. Mercer glanced toward Nahimana, ensuring she was still engaged with the warriors. Her cousin, Kitchi, leads the traditionalist faction. He was expected to marry Nahimana and eventually become chief until she refused him. This new information added another layer of complexity to the situation Ethan was entering. Political rivalries complicate treatment, he observed. In every culture, Mercer agreed. He finished collecting the supplies, wrapping them carefully in oilcloth. There's something else you should know. A white woman arrived here 2 days ago, says she's researching Apache medicine. Name of Montgomery. Ethan stiffened in surprise. Eleanor Montgomery? From Silverhorn? The same. Said she was documenting traditional remedies for publication. Mercer's expression grew guarded. She's at the village now. The chief allowed it because she brought medicines and seemed genuinely interested in their traditions. But her timing struck me as curious. Before Ethan could question him further, Nahimana rejoined them. Word has been sent to my father, she announced. We will rest here tonight and continue to the village tomorrow. Mercer provided them with a small cabin behind the main trading post, a simple structure with 2 cots, a table, and a stone fireplace. After weeks of sleeping rough, even these basic accommodations felt luxurious. As evening fell, Ethan sorted through the medical supplies, mentally formulating treatment plans based on Nahimana's description of the symptoms. The work felt both familiar and strange, medical procedures he had performed countless times during the war, now to be applied in a context he could scarcely have imagined. You're troubled, Nahimana observed, watching him from where she sat near the fire. Ethan paused in his inventory. Your father has allowed another outsider into your village, a woman named Eleanor Montgomery, the writer from Silverhorn. Nahimana nodded. I heard the warriors speak of her. She brings medicine and asks many questions. Her presence complicates things. Why? Because she knows you? Because I don't know why she's really there. Ethan resumed his sorting. People rarely cross Apache territory just to document traditional medicine. Nahimana considered this. You think she has another purpose? Everyone has another purpose, Nahimana. The railroad wants your land for tracks and timber. The army wants your people confined to reservations. Companies back east want your medicinal knowledge for profit. He closed the medical bag with finality. Even I had another purpose once when I wore a uniform. And now? Her dark eyes held his, unwavering. What is your purpose now, Ethan Calloway? The question penetrated deeper than she perhaps intended. What was his purpose? For years he had drifted without one, letting the current of circumstance carry him from place to place, interaction to interaction. The deliberate choice to help, to use his skills intentionally rather than reluctantly, represented a fundamental shift. To make amends, perhaps, he said finally, or just to do what I should have done years ago, heal instead of harm. Nahimana nodded, satisfied with his answer. Rest now. Tomorrow's journey will be difficult. They departed at dawn, accompanied by Haska and 4 additional warriors who had arrived during the night. Ethan rode a horse provided by Mercer, while Nahimana and the Apache moved with the fluid grace of those born to the landscape. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they ascended into the mountains, following game trails and ancient paths known only to the Apache. By midday, they had reached an elevation where pine forest gave way to spectacular views across valleys and canyons, a wilderness largely untouched by white settlement. The mesa lies beyond that ridge, Nahimana said, pointing toward a distant formation. We will reach it by nightfall. As they continued their ascent, Ethan noticed subtle signs of human presence that would be invisible to most observers. Small cairns marking trail junctions, trees scored with symbols meaningful only to those who knew their significance. Occasional glimpses of what might have been sentry positions among the rocks. Your people have adapted well to this territory, he observed. We have always lived in these mountains, Nahimana replied. Before the Spanish came with their horses and guns, before the Mexicans claimed this land, before your government drew its borders, we know every spring, every cave, every plant that grows here. Her pride was evident, not boastful, but matter of fact. This was knowledge earned through generations, preserved despite the systematic efforts to eradicate it. Late afternoon brought them to the base of the red mesa Nahimana had pointed out from the plateau. Up close, its scale was imposing, sheer cliffs rising hundreds of feet, seemingly impenetrable. The warriors led them to what appeared to be a solid rock face, but as they drew closer, a narrow fissure became visible, a natural passage into the mesa's interior. Few outsiders have ever seen what lies beyond, Nahimana said, her voice taking on a formal quality. You enter as a healer under my protection. Remember this honor. The passage twisted through the stone, sometimes so narrow that they had to proceed single file, leading their horses carefully over the uneven ground. After several hundred yards, it widened suddenly, opening into a sight that momentarily stole Ethan's breath. Within the mesa's natural walls lay a hidden valley, a sanctuary of unexpected beauty. A small lake gleamed in the late afternoon sun, fed by springs emerging from the cliffs. Terraced fields climbed the gentler slopes, cultivated with corn, beans, and squash. Orchards of fruit trees dotted the landscape, and nestled against the protective embrace of the cliffs stood the Apache village, a collection of traditional wickiups interspersed with more permanent wooden structures. People moved about the village in the ordinary routines of daily life, women grinding corn and tending cooking fires, men working with tools or tending horses, children playing. At their approach, activity paused as curious eyes turned toward the newcomers. Word of their arrival spread quickly. By the time they reached the village center, a crowd had gathered, expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. Ethan felt the weight of their scrutiny as he dismounted, a white man in the heart of Apache territory, a representative of the very people who had brought so much suffering. From the largest structure emerged a man whose bearing immediately marked him as the chief. Tall and straight, despite his years, with deep lines etched into a face that had witnessed both triumph and tragedy, Nantantaza carried his authority with natural dignity. At his side walked a younger man, whose resemblance to the chief marked him as a close relative, likely the cousin Mercer had mentioned, Kichi. Nahimana approached her father and spoke quietly in their language, explaining, perhaps justifying the white stranger's presence. The chief listened without expression, his dark eyes occasionally shifting to study Ethan. When she finished, he stepped forward. My daughter says you are a healer who once tried to help our people, he said in surprisingly good English. That the spirits have guided you back to us in our time of need. I have some skill with medicine, Ethan replied carefully. I've come to offer help against the sickness affecting your children, if you'll accept it. Why would you help those your people have tried to destroy? The question came from Kichi, his tone sharp with challenge. Before Ethan could respond, another voice joined the conversation, cultured, female, and unexpectedly familiar. Perhaps because not all white people share the same purpose, young man. Eleanor Montgomery stepped forward from the crowd, her practical traveling clothes dusty from the trail, but her bearing as composed as it had been in Silverhorn's saloon. She nodded to Ethan with no show of surprise at his presence. Dr. Calloway, I thought our paths might cross again. Miss Montgomery, Ethan acknowledged, hiding his own surprise. You've come a long way from Silverhorn. As have you. Her gaze was penetrating, assessing. Though perhaps we've both been drawn here by similar interest. The chief raised a hand, silencing further exchange. You will speak of your purposes later. Now we have sick children who need attention. He turned to Ethan. My daughter vouches for your skill and your heart. That is enough for me to grant you opportunity to prove yourself. Kichi began to object, but the chief silenced him with a look. The council will discuss this tonight. Until then, the white healer may examine the sick ones. With that pronouncement, the crowd began to disperse, though many continued to watch Ethan with undisguised wariness. Nahimana led him toward a structure set slightly apart from the others, larger than the typical wickiup, its entrance marked with symbols Ethan recognized as having medicinal significance. Inside, the space was divided into sections by hanging blankets. Several pallets lay on the earthen floor, occupied by children of various ages. An elderly woman moved among them, applying damp cloths to fevered foreheads and administering liquids from clay pots. She looked up as they entered, her ancient face showing recognition and respect when she saw Nahimana. Shima, Nahimana said by way of greeting. This is Ethan, the healer I spoke of. The old woman, Shima, studied Ethan with eyes that, despite their milky cataracts, seemed to see far more than physical appearance. She spoke briefly in Apache. She welcomes you to the medicine lodge, Nahimana translated, and asks what you will need to examine the sick ones. Ethan set down his medical bag and surveyed the makeshift infirmary. 8 children lay on pallets, their conditions varying from restless fever to the labored breathing of advanced respiratory distress. The air was heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs and smoke from a small fire over which various concoctions simmered. Water for washing, he replied, already rolling up his sleeves. Clean cloths, and I'll need you to translate my questions and explanations. For the next several hours, Ethan worked methodically, examining each child with the thoroughness his medical training had instilled. He checked pulses, listened to chests, examined throats, and noted symptoms with clinical precision. Shima watched his every move, occasionally commenting to Nahimana in tones that suggested professional assessment rather than suspicion. The pattern of illness confirmed his initial suspicion. Influenza, complicated by secondary pneumonia, likely introduced by traders and spreading rapidly through a population with limited immunity to European diseases. Some of the children showed signs of improvement, others remained critically ill, their breathing shallow and rapid. Your traditional treatments have helped, he told Shima through Nahimana's translation. The fever-reducing herbs are effective, but the lung infection requires additional approaches. From his supplies, Ethan prepared a mixture of quinine to reduce fever and willowbark extract for pain and inflammation. For the children with the most severe breathing difficulties, he created steam tents using blankets and hot water infused with pine needles and eucalyptus oil Mercer had provided. As he worked, Ethan found himself in an unexpected collaboration with Shima. Despite the language barrier, they developed a rhythm, she incorporating his treatments into her established routines, he deferring to her greater knowledge of the children's constitutions and previous responses. It was a medical partnership unlike any he had experienced, crossing cultural boundaries through shared purpose. Evening had fallen by the time Ethan completed his initial treatments. The most critical cases showed slight improvement, breathing eased, fevers reduced, though he knew the battle was far from won. Respiratory infections were treacherous, often appearing to recede before returning with greater force. Nahimana, who had stayed throughout to translate and assist, finally suggested they leave Shima to continue the care overnight. You need rest, she insisted, and food. You've used much strength. Outside, the village had settled into evening routines. Cooking fires glowed, casting long shadows across the central area where some elders gathered. Nahimana led Ethan to a smaller wickiup near the medicine lodge. You will stay here, she explained, close to the sick ones if you are needed in the night. Inside, someone had prepared a simple pallet with blankets, a water jug, and a small fire. The space was modest but clean, offering privacy that Ethan had not expected. I'll bring food, Nahimana said, leaving him momentarily alone. Ethan took the opportunity to wash away the day's exertions, pouring cool water from the jug over his hands and face. The ritual cleansing brought focus to his thoughts, which had been entirely consumed by medical concerns for hours. Now other questions surfaced. Eleanor Montgomery's presence remained unexplained, her research purpose plausible but insufficient to explain the risks she had taken traveling alone through Apache territory. The political dynamics within the tribe added another layer of complexity, with Kichi clearly opposed to outside intervention despite the children's suffering. And beneath these immediate concerns lay deeper questions about his own path forward. The day's work had awakened something long dormant, not just medical skill, but purpose. After years of drifting, he had acted with clarity and conviction, his decisions guided by healing rather than escape. Nahimana returned with a wooden bowl of stew, rich with game meat and unfamiliar but aromatic herbs, accompanied by a flat bread similar to tortillas. As Ethan ate, she settled across from him, her own food untouched, as she studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to reach beyond surface appearances. You did well today, she said. Shima says your hands know the work of healing, even if your spirit has been long away from it. The children are responding to treatment, Ethan replied, focusing on practicalities. But they're not out of danger. We'll need to monitor them closely, especially through the night when breathing often becomes more difficult. Shima will watch. She has not truly slept since the sickness came. Nahimana's expression softened with concern. She is old, but her strength is remarkable. She's a gifted healer. Her remedies for fever are as effective as anything I learned in medical school. A small smile touched Nahimana's lips. She said the same of your breathing treatments. That your steam tents work like our sweat lodge traditions, but gentler for the weak and children. The mutual professional respect pleased Ethan more than he expected. Throughout his medical career, he had encountered rigid hierarchies and dismissal of approaches that deviated from established doctrine. This open exchange of knowledge, free from pretension, represented medicine as it should be practiced. Adaptive, collaborative, focused on outcomes rather than orthodoxy. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of footsteps outside the wickiup. The entrance flap opened to reveal Eleanor Montgomery, her expression businesslike despite the lateness of the hour. "Dr. Calloway," she said by way of greeting, "I hope I'm not intruding, but I believe we have matters to discuss." Nahimana rose smoothly. "I will check on the children," she said, her tone neutral, but her glance at Eleanor distinctly reserved. She slipped past the other woman and disappeared into the night, leaving Ethan facing his unexpected visitor. Eleanor settled onto the ground without invitation, arranging her skirts with practiced efficiency. Up close, Ethan could see the toll the journey had taken. Her face was tanned by sun and wind, her hands scratched from travel through rough terrain. Yet her composure remained intact. Her wire-rimmed spectacles perched precisely on her nose as she regarded him with clinical interest. "I must admit, finding you here was unexpected," she began, "though perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. You seem to have a particular interest in Nahimana's welfare back in Silverhorn." "What are you doing here, Miss Montgomery?" Ethan asked directly. "This isn't a safe place for a white woman traveling alone." "I might ask you the same question, Dr. Calloway." She emphasized his title slightly. "After all, I at least presented myself honestly as a researcher. You concealed your medical background quite deliberately." "My reasons are my own." "As are mine." She adjusted her spectacles. "But since we find ourselves in this remarkable situation, perhaps we can be of use to each other." Ethan's wariness increased. "In what way?" "I've been documenting Apache medicinal practices for several weeks now," Eleanor explained. "Their knowledge of local botanicals is extraordinary, particularly their treatments for respiratory ailments, which seem far more effective than standard Western approaches to influenza." "And you're collecting this knowledge for a book," Ethan said skeptically. "For science," she corrected. "And yes, eventually publication. But my interest is genuine, Dr. Calloway. These healing traditions deserve documentation before they're lost forever. Lost because your people are systematically destroying those who practice them." Eleanor didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes, which is precisely why this work matters. The knowledge must be preserved, even if—" She hesitated, then continued more carefully. "Even if the future of the Apache themselves is uncertain." The clinical detachment of her statement struck Ethan as both honest and disturbing. "You speak of their knowledge as something that can be separated from their existence. Isn't that what you're doing as well?" Her gaze was challenging. "Using their traditional remedies to supplement your medical treatments? The difference is merely one of documentation." Before Ethan could respond, shouting erupted from the direction of the central gathering area. He rose quickly, moving to the entrance of the wickiup. In the firelight, he could see a confrontation unfolding. Kitchi standing toe-to-toe with the chief, their voices raised in what was clearly heated disagreement. Warriors and elders had gathered around them, the tribe seemingly divided in their support. Eleanor joined him at the entrance. "The council meeting," she explained quietly. "They're debating whether to allow our continued presence. Kitchi argues that white medicine has failed and brought only harm to the tribe. He wants to retreat deeper into the mountains, away from all outside influence. And the chief favors a middle path, using what is useful from outside knowledge while maintaining their traditions and independence." She studied the confrontation with analytical interest. "It's fascinating, really. a microcosm of the larger cultural conflict playing out across the frontier. "These aren't specimens for your research, Miss Montgomery," Ethan said sharply. "They're people facing extinction." Her expression sobered. "I'm well aware, De Calloway, more aware than you might think." She turned away from the scene outside. "We should continue this discussion another time. The political situation here is delicate. Our presence together might be misinterpreted." With that enigmatic comment, she departed, leaving Ethan with the distinct impression that Eleanor Montgomery's purpose in Apache territory extended well beyond academic research. Her knowledge of tribal politics, her comfort in this dangerous environment, her careful phrasing, all suggested layers of motivation she had not yet revealed. The shouting from the council fire eventually subsided, though Ethan could not determine the outcome of the debate. He settled onto his pallet, mind racing despite physical exhaustion. The medical challenge alone would have been complex enough, treating an unfamiliar population through a language barrier with limited supplies. But now political factions, Eleanor's mysterious agenda, and his own unresolved past with the Apache added dimensions he had not anticipated when agreeing to help. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by both the unfamiliar sounds of the village and his own troubled thoughts. Sometime in the deepest part of night, he woke to find a figure standing in the entrance of the wickiup, silhouetted against the moonlight, familiar yet different. "Nahimana?" he questioned, reaching for his revolver out of habit. "The children worsen," she said simply. "Shima asks for you." Fully alert now, Ethan grabbed his medical bag and followed her through the silent village to the medicine lodge. Inside, the situation had indeed deteriorated. Three of the children who had shown improvement earlier now struggled for breath, their lips tinged with the bluish cast that signaled insufficient oxygen. Shima moved among them, her ancient face lined with concern as she applied compresses and murmured what might have been prayers. Without waiting for translation, Ethan set to work, using hand gestures to communicate his intentions to Shima. He prepared stronger infusions of the medications, focusing particularly on opening the children's airways. The next hours passed in tense focus, the three healers working in unspoken coordination, Ethan with his medical treatments, Shima with her traditional remedies, Nahimana bridging the gap between their approaches. Dawn was breaking when the crisis finally passed. The children's breathing eased, their fevers reduced, their restless movements settling into more natural sleep. Ethan sat back on his heels, exhaustion washing over him as the immediate danger receded. "They will live," Shima said in halting English, the first time she had revealed knowledge of the language. Her ancient eyes held Ethan's with unexpected warmth. Good medicine, both ways. The simple acknowledgement carried weight beyond its words, recognition from one healer to another, transcending cultural differences through shared purpose. Ethan nodded in acceptance of both the praise and the responsibility it carried. As they emerged from the medicine lodge into the early morning light, Ethan noticed increased activity in the village. Warriors moved with purpose. Women gathered children close. Elders conferred in small groups. Something had changed overnight. "What's happening?" he asked Nahimana. Her expression was grave. "Scouts returned during the night. Soldiers have been seen in the lower canyons, a larger party than usual, with supply wagons suggesting a longer mission. They're searching for this place? Perhaps, or establishing a new outpost to control the territory." She looked toward where her father stood with several warriors, examining what appeared to be a map drawn in the dirt. "The council has decided to send the women, children, and elders to a secondary camp deeper in the mountains. Warriors will remain to watch the soldiers' movements." "The sick children can't be moved," Ethan said immediately. "The journey could kill them." "I know. They will stay, with Shima and some others to care for them." Nahimana's gaze met his, a question in her eyes. "My father asks if you will stay as well. Your knowledge may be needed if the sickness worsens again." The request placed Ethan in a precarious position. Remaining meant potential discovery by the army. Discovery that would brand him a traitor for aiding hostile Apache, yet leaving men abandoning patients who still needed care, breaking the oath he had once taken to heal without consideration of circumstances. Before he could respond, a commotion near the village entrance drew their attention. A warrior ran toward the chief, his expression urgent as he delivered a message that caused visible concern among the leadership. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Nahimana was already moving toward the gathering, Ethan following close behind. They reached the group as her father turned to address the assembled warriors. A white man approaches the mesa, Nantantaza announced. Alone and unarmed, he asked to speak with the chief of the Free Apache. Murmurs spread through the crowd, some angry, some curious, some fearful. A lone white man seeking direct communication was unprecedented, especially given the increasing military presence in the region. Does he give a name? Kitchi demanded. The messenger nodded. He calls himself Joseph Walker. He says he brings warning of great danger to all Apache. The name struck Ethan with unexpected force. Joseph Walker, the name Dawson and Colonel Reed had mentioned in Silverhorn, an engineer with the Southern Pacific Railroad, involved in surveying Apache territory for the planned expansion. I know of this man, Eleanor Montgomery said, emerging from her quarters to join the discussion. He's a senior engineer with the railroad company. If he's here alone, it suggests he's acting against his employer's interests. Nantantaza considered this information, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he turned to the messenger. Bring him, blindfolded. 10 warriors as escort. As the messenger departed to carry out these instructions, the chief addressed his son and the other leaders. Preparations for departure will continue. The women and children must be safe in the mountain camp by nightfall. The village erupted into controlled chaos, people gathering essential belongings, preparing travois for those too young or old to walk the difficult trail, securing food and water for the journey. Through it all, Ethan remained near the medicine lodge, unwilling to leave his patients even as uncertainty mounted. Nahimana joined him after conferring with her father. I will stay with the sick ones, she said. My father asked that you remain as well, at least until we know why this railroad man has come. And you trust me to hear whatever he has to say? Her dark eyes held his steadily. My father believes you have proven your heart, Ethan Calloway. So do I. The simple statement carried a weight of trust Ethan hadn't experienced in years. Not since before the war, before the compromises and failures that had driven him to abandon medicine and wander the frontier in search of anonymity. That trust now anchored him to this place and these people in a way he hadn't anticipated. Within the hour, the scout returned with Joseph Walker. The engineer was a man in his 60s, silver-haired and stooped, but with alert eyes that took in his surroundings with professional assessment. Despite the blindfold he had worn during the approach, he carried himself with the dignity of someone accustomed to difficult circumstances. Nantantaza received him in the central clearing, seated with the tribe's leaders in a semicircle. Ethan stood slightly apart, aware of his ambiguous status, neither fully Apache nor aligned with the white interloper. Eleanor Montgomery positioned herself similarly on the opposite side, her notebook conspicuously absent as she observed the proceedings with keen attention. You come alone to the land of those your people call enemies, the chief began, his English deliberate but clear. This requires either great courage or great desperation. Walker bowed slightly in acknowledgement. Perhaps both, Chief Taza. I come because what I know can no longer be carried in silence. Speak then. Walker drew a deep breath. The railroad has obtained approval from Washington for a new route through this territory, a route that will cut directly through lands promised to the Apache in the last treaty. Survey teams have been mapping the terrain for months, preparing for construction to begin before winter. This information, while concerning, was hardly surprising. The Southern Pacific had been pushing eastward for years, treaties with native tribes consistently broken to accommodate its expansion. But Walker wasn't finished. What you don't know is that the railroad has entered a partnership with the Occidental Pharmaceutical Company. They're not just interested in laying tracks. They're after something specific to these mountains. The healing plants, Nahimana said, speaking for the first time. Walker nodded, turning toward her voice. Yes, rare medicinal plants that grow nowhere else. Plants your people have used for generations. Occidental believes these plants contain compounds that could revolutionize medicine and bring enormous profits to whoever controls them. Ethan remembered Dawson's words in Silverhorn about pharmaceutical interest in Apache medicine. What had seemed like frontier rumor now revealed itself as calculated corporate strategy. Plants can be gathered anywhere, Kitchi said dismissively. They do not need our mountains. But they do, Walker insisted. Their scientists have determined that these particular plants only grow in this specific soil with this elevation and water source. They've tried transplanting specimens to other locations without success. And this is why soldiers search our canyons? Nantayantaza asked. For plants? Not just for plants, Walker's voice grew grim. For your knowledge of how to use them. The company knows the plants alone aren't enough. They need the processing methods, the combinations, the preparations that make them effective. Methods only the Apache understand. A cold silence fell over the gathering as the implications became clear. The threat wasn't merely to their territory, but to their cultural knowledge, intellectual property that had sustained them for generations. How does the Army justify this intrusion? Eleanor asked sharply. The Medicine Lodge Treaty explicitly protected Apache medicinal grounds. Walker turned toward her, voice, surprise registering at another white presence. Officially, they're responding to reports of hostile activity, supposed raids on settlements that never actually occurred. Colonel Reed has manufactured incidents to justify a military presence. Reed, Ethan repeated, the name connecting threads of memory. The officer I saw at Dawson's store in Silverhorn. Yes, Walker confirmed. Malcolm Reed, former cavalry officer, now employed by both the Railroad and Occidental. He's coordinating the entire operation, military pressure, scientific collection, and eventual exploitation of the resources. The chief rose to his feet, his decision apparently made. We thank you for this warning, Joseph Walker. Now you must leave for your safety and ours. When soldiers find you missing, they will search more urgently. Walker nodded in acceptance but made one final plea. There's something else you should know. Reed doesn't plan to negotiate for access to your knowledge. He intends to capture medicine people, those who hold the secrets of the plants, and force their cooperation through whatever means necessary. His words hung in the air like smoke, their implication clear. Shima, Nahimana, and any others identified as keepers of medicinal knowledge would be specific targets, not just casualties of general persecution, but deliberate captives for their valuable information. As Walker was led away, blindfolded once more for the journey back to the lowlands, Nantayantaza turned to his people with renewed urgency. The women and children leave now. No delays. Nahimana, you must go with them. Father, I cannot, she protested. The sick children need care, and I am a medicine keeper. My place is here protecting our knowledge, which is precisely why you must go. His voice softened slightly. Daughter, if what this man says is true, you are in greatest danger. Your knowledge must be preserved for our people's future. The logic was undeniable, yet Ethan saw the conflict in Nahimana's expression. Duty to her patients warring with the larger responsibility to safeguard cultural heritage. Before she could respond, he stepped forward. Chief Taza, he said, drawing all eyes, I will stay with the sick children. With Shima's guidance, I can continue their treatment while Nahimana travels to safety with the others. The chief studied him with penetrating intensity. And if soldiers come, where will your loyalty stand then, healer? It was the question that had shadowed Ethan since his arrival, the fundamental test of his character and intentions. 8 years ago, he had failed such a test, arriving too late to prevent atrocity, unable to save those who needed his skills most. Now, circumstance offered a second chance at the choice he had once avoided. My loyalty is to my patients, he said simply. I've seen enough suffering caused by those who claim to bring civilization. I won't be part of it again. Something shifted in Nantayantaza's expression, a subtle change that might have been approval or merely acceptance of necessity. He nodded once. Then you will stay. Shima will guide your healing work. He turned to his daughter. And you will lead our people to the high sanctuary, carrying our medicine knowledge beyond the soldier's reach. Though clearly torn, Nahimana bowed her head in acceptance of her father's decision. I will prepare for departure, she said, moving toward the medicine lodge to gather essential supplies. Ethan followed, aware that their partnership in healing was about to be severed just as it had begun to prove effective. Inside the lodge, Nahimana worked with focused efficiency, selecting crucial herbs and preparations from Shima's stores, wrapping them carefully in leather pouches. These children still need care, she said without looking up. The white sickness often returns when it seems defeated. You must watch for blue lips, fingernails turning dark, breathing that sounds like stones rattling. I know the signs, Ethan assured her. Shima and I will manage. Nahimana paused in her preparations, finally meeting his gaze. Why are you doing this, Ethan? Staying puts you at risk of being branded a traitor by your own people. It was a question he had asked himself repeatedly since offering to remain. The answer came with surprising clarity. Perhaps I already betrayed them years ago, when I wore their uniform but couldn't support their actions. This feels more honest. She studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to reach beyond surface appearances. 8 years ago, you tried to save my mother but failed. Now you try to save our children and our knowledge. Perhaps the spirits have brought you back to complete what was unfinished. The observation stirred something deep within Ethan, a sense of purpose beyond mere atonement, a completion of a circle begun long ago. Before he could respond, shouts erupted from outside, urgent calls that needed no translation to convey alarm. They rushed from the medicine lodge to find the village in sudden turmoil. Warriors grabbed weapons, women hurried children toward the hidden exit routes. The chief stood conferring urgently with scouts who had apparently just arrived with troubling news. What's happening? Ethan asked as they approached. Nantan Taza's expression was grave. Soldiers have been spotted in the lower canyon, moving faster than expected, following Walker's trail despite our precautions. They will reach the mesa by sunset. How many? 2 full companies, with artillery. The chief's weathered face revealed the calculation behind his eyes, weighing the vulnerability of his people against the imperative to protect their sanctuary. We cannot fight such numbers. All must leave now. Even the sick ones must be moved. Ethan considered the medical implications rapidly. The most critical children can't survive the journey. They need at least another day of treatment before they can be moved safely. The chief's expression hardened with the impossible choice before him. If they stay, soldiers will find them. If they go, the mountain journey may claim them. There is no good path. There is another option, Eleanor Montgomery said, stepping forward unexpectedly. She had changed from her practical traveling clothes into a more formal dress, her hair arranged precisely. I can buy you time. All eyes turned to her in confusion. I am known to Colonel Reed, she explained. My family has investments in the Southern Pacific. If I ride down to meet the soldiers claiming to be here on a research expedition gone awry, I can delay their advance, perhaps long enough for your people to reach safety. The audacity of the proposal silenced even Kitschy's usual objections. Eleanor continued, her practical tone belying the risk she was suggesting. They'll be reluctant to disregard a woman of my social standing. Reed will need to adjust his approach, provide escort, observe proprieties. Each hour of delay increases your people's chance of escape. Nantan Taza studied her with undisguised suspicion. Why would you do this? My reasons are my own, she replied, echoing Ethan's earlier words. But they include ensuring these children survive and this knowledge is preserved. The chief conferred briefly with his advisors before turning back to Eleanor. We accept your offer, but know this, if you betray us, no place will be far enough to escape Apache memory. Understood. She nodded crisply. I'll need my horse prepared immediately. As preparations for this unexpected strategy unfolded, Ethan pulled Eleanor aside, his suspicion mounting. What game are you playing, Miss Montgomery? First researching Apache medicine, now risking your life to protect them? Her composed expression faltered slightly. Not a game, Doctor. A mission. One I've pursued for years. What mission? Eleanor glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before answering. My brother died of tuberculosis 5 years ago. The best physicians in Boston could do nothing for him. Yet I've documented cases of Apache patients surviving the same disease using traditional treatments. You're seeking a cure. I'm seeking truth, she corrected. Medical knowledge that Western science has ignored or suppressed because of who developed it. Knowledge that could save countless lives. Her passion seemed genuine, yet Ethan sensed she still withheld crucial information. Before he could press further, Nahimana approached, now dressed for the journey to the mountain sanctuary and carrying additional medicine pouches. The children are being prepared for travel, she informed them. Shima says the four strongest can make the journey, but two remain too weak. I'll stay with them, Ethan decided immediately, in the medicine lodge. When the soldiers come, I'll claim they're my patients. White children I found abandoned after a wagon attack. Nahimana's eyes widened slightly. They will not believe this. They might if the children are hidden among blankets and I'm convincing enough. It's their best chance. He turned to Eleanor. How long can you delay Reed's advance? A few hours at most, she admitted, until he realizes I'm intentionally obstructing his mission. That's enough, Ethan said. Enough for the main group to reach the high sanctuary. Enough for these children to receive one more treatment before they have to be moved. The plan came together with urgent efficiency, the village's evacuation accelerating, while a small group prepared the medicine lodge to appear as a white doctor's temporary clinic. Eleanor departed on horseback, riding boldly down toward the approaching soldiers with a story of academic enthusiasm leading her astray in dangerous territory. As the village emptied, Nahimana lingered at the medicine lodge, reluctance evident in every line of her body. She had transferred her knowledge to Ethan as completely as possible in their limited time. Detailed instructions for treatments, warning signs to watch for, combinations of traditional and Western approaches that had proven most effective. I should stay, she said for the third time, checking the breathing of the weakest child. My place is with the sick ones. Your place is preserving your knowledge, Ethan countered gently. These children have a fighting chance now, thanks to what you've taught me. But if Reed captures you, an entire tradition of healing could be lost. She knew he was right, yet the healer's instinct to remain with patients in crisis clearly warred with her broader responsibilities. Finally, with the village nearly empty and her father calling for the last group's departure, she turned to Ethan with unexpected intensity. When this is over, if we both Surayamaim come to the high sanctuary, 3 days' journey northeast of here, following the river to its source, ask for Ma'am. The invitation carried weight beyond its words, an acknowledgement of connection, of shared purpose that transcended their brief association. Before Ethan could respond, she leaned forward and pressed something into his palm, a small leather pouch on a cord. Medicine bundle, she explained. Protection and strength. Wear it. Without waiting for his response, she turned and hurried to join the departing group, disappearing into the hidden exit passage without looking back. Within moments, the village stood empty except for Ethan, Shima, and the two critically ill children in the medicine lodge. 4 souls awaiting the approach of an enemy force with nothing but conviction and desperate improvisation as defense. Ethan slipped the medicine bundle around his neck, tucking it beneath his shirt where it rested warm against his skin. Then he set to work preparing the lodge for the deception ahead, rearranging supplies to resemble a Western physician's equipment, concealing obvious Apache artifacts, positioning the children to be visible only as small forms beneath blankets. As the sun began its descent toward the western cliffs, he stepped outside to survey the abandoned village. In mere hours, a vibrant community had transformed into a ghost settlement. Cook fires cold, dwellings empty, the evidence of human presence rapidly fading like footprints in desert sand. From the canyon below came the distant sound of approaching horses and men, the inexorable advance of a force that had pursued the Apache across decades and territories. Ethan Calloway stood alone in the gathering dusk, a white man in an Apache sanctuary, preparing to defend with deception what he had once failed to protect with honesty. The wheel of fate had brought him full circle, offering a second chance at a choice that had defined his life. This time he would not arrive too late. This time he would stand his ground. This time the healer would not fail those who needed him most. The first rays of dawn crept over the eastern cliffs, illuminating the abandoned Apache village in pale golden light. Ethan stood at the entrance of the medicine lodge, watching for the soldiers he knew would soon arrive. The night had passed with agonizing slowness, each hour marked by the labored breathing of the 2 children under his care and the nearly imperceptible movements of Shima as she tended them with quiet determination. Eleanor Montgomery's diversion had bought them precious time, enough for the main body of Apache to escape into the deeper mountains and for Ethan to stabilize his young patients as much as possible. Now, as morning broke, he faced the inevitable confrontation that would test his improvised plan. "They come," Shima said quietly, appearing beside him with a sudden silence that belied her advanced age. Her English was broken but serviceable, revealed now that necessity demanded direct communication. Ethan nodded, hearing the distant echo of horses and men that her superior senses had detected minutes earlier. Remember, stay hidden until I call for you. Let me do the talking. She inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, though her ancient eyes held a skepticism that needed no translation. They both understood the fragility of the deception they were about to attempt. Inside the medicine lodge, Ethan made final adjustments to their hasty disguise. The two Apache children, a boy of perhaps 8 and a girl no more than 6, lay on pallets arranged to suggest a white physician's care rather than native healing practices. Their distinctive clothing had been replaced with simple cloth wrappings, their faces partially concealed by blankets. Both remained feverish and weak, their breathing labored but improved from the critical state they had been in the previous day. He had positioned his medical bag prominently, Western medicines and instruments clearly visible. Apache remedies remained in use but were disguised in Western containers. Shima's herbal preparations now housed in glass bottles labeled with Latin terminology from Ethan's medical training. It was a charade that might not withstand close scrutiny, but needed only to create momentary confusion and plausibility. The sounds of approaching soldiers grew louder, the rhythmic beat of hooves, the jingle of tack, the occasional commands shouted across the canyon. Ethan straightened his clothing, ran a hand through his beard, and stepped outside to meet whatever came with the appearance of calm confidence. The first riders emerged from the hidden passage that led into the mesa's interior, scouts moving with weapons ready, scanning the empty village with professional vigilance. Behind them rode a larger contingent of cavalry, perhaps 30 men, their blue uniforms dusty from hard travel, but their formation disciplined and purposeful. At their head rode two figures Ethan recognized immediately: Colonel Malcolm Reed, his posture rigid with military bearing, and beside him, Eleanor Montgomery, her expression composed though her eyes darted toward the medicine lodge with warning. Ethan could read even at a distance. "Fan out and search every structure," Reed commanded as they entered the village center. "Look for recent signs, hidden passages, anything that indicates where they've gone." Soldiers dismounted and began moving through the village with methodical efficiency, weapons at the ready despite the obvious abandonment. Ethan remained standing quietly beside the medicine lodge, making no attempt to hide or approach, waiting to be discovered rather than attracting immediate attention. It was Eleanor who spotted him first, or perhaps deliberately directed Reed's attention his way. "Colonel," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness, "there appears to be someone at that structure." Reed's head snapped around, his hand moving instantly to his sidearm. When he recognized the solitary figure as white rather than Apache, momentary confusion crossed his features before settling into suspicious assessment. "You there," he called, urging his horse forward. "Identify yourself." Ethan raised his hand slightly to show he carried no weapon. "Dr. Ethan Calloway," he responded, his voice steady, "former Army surgeon." Reed reined in his horse a few yards away, studying Ethan with narrow-eyed intensity. "What in God's name is a white doctor doing in an Apache stronghold?" "Treating patients, Colonel." Ethan gestured toward the medicine lodge. "Two children, survivors of an attack on a settler family in the Eastern Valley. I found them 3 days ago and brought them here for treatment, the only shelter I could find in this terrain." Reed's expression remained skeptical, but the plausibility of finding a doctor caring for patients gave him momentary pause. "You're aware this is a hostile Apache settlement? You're fortunate they didn't kill you on sight." "The place was abandoned when I arrived," Ethan lied smoothly. "Signs of hasty departure. I assume they fled from your patrol." Eleanor guided her horse forward, her intervention clearly calculated. "Colonel, if there are injured children, perhaps we should offer assistance. I have some medical training myself." Her suggestions served dual purposes, reinforcing Ethan's cover story while giving her legitimate reason to approach the medicine lodge and assess the situation. Reed hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Lieutenant Morrison," he called to a younger officer, "continue the search of the village. I want to know where those savages have gone, and how recently." He dismounted, straightening his uniform jacket with practiced precision. "I'll inspect the doctor's patients myself." Ethan led the way into the medicine lodge, acutely aware of the precarious balance they now walked. Too much resistance would arouse suspicion. Too little would allow closer examination. than the disguised children could withstand. As they entered, Shima had positioned herself as instructed, sitting quietly in a shadowed corner, head bowed beneath a shawl that concealed her distinctly Apache features, presenting the appearance of an elderly Mexican or mixed-blood helper rather than a tribal medicine woman. The interior was dim after the bright morning light, buying precious moments as Reed's eyes adjusted. Ethan moved immediately to his patients, checking pulses with professional efficiency that required no pretense. "Fever's down slightly," he reported aloud, his medical narration serving as distraction. "Respiratory rate improved since yesterday, still significant congestion in both lungs." Eleanor approached the children with convincing concern, placing a hand on the boy's forehead while subtly adjusting the blanket to better conceal his features. "What treatments have you administered, doctor?" "Quinine for fever, eucalyptus steam for the breathing, willow bark extract for inflammation." Ethan indicated the bottles he had relabeled. Basic field medicine with limited supplies. Reed had begun examining the lodge's interior with military thoroughness, his attention drawn to details that might reveal its true purpose. "Rather convenient that you found an abandoned Apache medicine lodge to treat your patients, doctor." "I recognized it as some sort of tribal structure," Ethan acknowledged, maintaining his role, "but it offered shelter and water access. When you're treating critical patients in wilderness conditions, Colonel, you don't question suitable accommodations." Reed picked up one of the disguised medicine containers, studying its improvised label. "You seem well equipped for someone traveling alone in hostile territory." "I never travel without medical supplies," Ethan replied. "Habit from the war." "Which regiment did you serve with, doctor?" Reed's question came with the sharpness of a man setting a trap. 7th Medical Corps, attached to the 3rd Infantry during the Wilderness Campaign. Ethan provided his actual service details, knowing they would stand up to any verification. Later transferred to frontier duty in the territories. Something flickered in Reed's eyes, recognition perhaps, or connection to information he already possessed. "Your name is familiar, Calloway. Weren't you involved in that business with the Apache band near Fort Craig 8 years ago?" The direct reference to the massacre that had driven Ethan from military service landed like a physical blow, but he maintained his composed expression. "I was part of a medical relief expedition following a military engagement, yes." "Relief expedition?" Reed repeated with a thin smile. "That's one way to describe it." The exchange was interrupted by Eleanor, who had completed a theatrical examination of the children. "These young ones need continued care, Colonel. They're in no condition to be moved until the fever breaks completely." Reed frowned, military objectives clearly warring with the complication of ill children and a white doctor in his path. "We're not in the business of running a hospital, Miss Montgomery. My orders are to locate the Apache band and secure this location." "Surely the United States Army isn't so heartless as to endanger already suffering children?" Eleanor replied, her cultured voice carrying just enough moral authority to make Reed uncomfortable. "I'm certain your superiors would commend your humanity in allowing Dr. Calloway to continue his care until they can be safely transported." The manipulation was skillful, appealing to Reed's concern for how his actions would be perceived by superiors while making it difficult for him to force the issue without appearing callous. His jaw tightened in evident frustration. "You have until tomorrow morning, Doctor," he decided finally. "By then I expect these children ready for transport to the nearest Army post where they'll receive proper care." His gaze hardened. "In the meantime, this village and everything in it is under military control. You'll confine your activities to this structure." "Understood, Colonel," Ethan agreed, relieved at the temporary reprieve, but aware it merely delayed the inevitable confrontation. The children's condition should improve enough for a careful transport by then. Reed turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Doctor. I'll be posting guards outside this lodge. For your protection, of course." The threat beneath the courtesy was unmistakable. They would be watched. Any attempt to flee or signal others would be detected immediately. Ethan nodded his acknowledgement, maintaining the pretense of a doctor grateful for military protection rather than a man effectively placed under guard. As Reed departed to continue directing the search of the village, Eleanor lingered, adjusting blankets with deliberate movements that allowed her to speak quietly. "They have tracking dogs arriving with the 2nd detachment," she murmured. "By nightfall, they'll know which direction the tribe took." You need to move these children before then. How? Ethan kept his voice equally low, his hands busy with medical tasks. We're under guard, and they're still too weak for the mountain trails. There's another way out, Eleanor said. A passage beneath the village, through caves that connect to the river canyon. The Apache elder knows it. She glanced toward Shima, who remained in her corner, seemingly oblivious, but undoubtedly absorbing every word. How do you know about a secret passage? Ethan asked, suspicion rising despite their apparent alliance. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Because I've been mapping Apache medicinal plant locations for 3 years, Dr. Calloway. Nothing in this region happens without my knowledge. She moved toward the entrance. I'll return when I can. Be ready after sunset. With that enigmatic statement, she departed, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers about the mysterious researcher who seemed to navigate between worlds with unsettling ease. He turned to Shima, who had already risen, and moved to the children now that Reed had departed. You heard? He asked simply. The old woman nodded, her wrinkled hands checking the boy's pulse with practiced precision. Underground path, hard journey for sick ones. Harder than facing what happens if Reed discovers who they really are. Shima's ancient eyes met his. Wisdom and resignation mingled in equal measure. No choice. Must go when darkness comes. They spent the hours of daylight in tense preparation, continuing treatments while surreptitiously gathering essential supplies for the escape attempt. The children responded well to the combined regimen of Western and Apache medicine, their fevers reducing further and breathing becoming less labored. Whether they would have strength for the journey ahead remained uncertain, but each hour of treatment improved their chances. Through the open entrance, Ethan observed the military operation unfolding in the village. Soldiers methodically searched every structure, collected artifacts for examination, and established a perimeter that effectively sealed the mesa's known entrances. Reed himself supervised the cataloging of items from the chief's dwelling, his attention to detail suggesting purposes beyond mere security concerns. By mid-afternoon, the second detachment Eleanor had mentioned arrived, 20 additional soldiers accompanied by supply wagons and, as she had warned, 3 handlers with tracking dogs. The animals' keen noses would quickly discover the tribe's escape route, regardless of how carefully they had concealed their trail. As evening approached, Ethan administered stronger doses of medicine to the children, preparing them as best he could for the ordeal ahead. The boy, whose name Shima had revealed was Taklishim, Greywater, had regained enough strength to sit upright and take broth. The girl, Dolly, Bluebird, remained weaker but showed marked improvement in her breathing. The guards outside were rotated at sunset, the new men lighting lanterns that cast long shadows across the village center where soldiers had established their camp. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted on the evening breeze, accompanied by the low murmur of conversation and occasional laughter. Ordinary men engaged in what they perceived as ordinary duty, unaware of the moral complexities that haunted their mission. Darkness had fully settled when Eleanor appeared at the medicine lodge, accompanied by a young lieutenant who seemed both respectful and somewhat captivated by her presence. She carried a basket ostensibly containing food and additional medical supplies. Colonel Reed thought you and your assistant might appreciate some proper rations, she announced for the benefit of the guards. Lieutenant Hayes was kind enough to escort me. The lieutenant nodded stiffly. Ma'am insisted on checking on the young ones herself. She's got a caring heart. Most appreciated, Ethan replied, accepting the basket and playing his role in the charade. The children are showing improvement, but additional supplies are always welcome. Eleanor entered the lodge while the lieutenant remained outside, engaged in conversation with the guards. Once inside, she moved quickly, her composed demeanor giving way to urgent efficiency. We have perhaps 2 hours, she said quietly, extracting items from the basket that were clearly not food. A small lantern with shuttered sides, a rough map drawn on hide, extra blankets for the children. Reed plans to begin tracking at first light, using the dogs to follow the main group. And you know this how? Ethan asked, still uncertain of her true allegiances despite their apparent cooperation. The lieutenant is remarkably forthcoming when encouraged by feminine interest, she replied matter-of-factly. A predictable weakness I've exploited throughout this expedition. Shima had already begun preparing the children for travel, wrapping them in additional layers against the night chill and administering a final dose of strengthening medicine. a dark liquid that smelled of pine and unfamiliar herbs. She spoke softly to them in Apache, her words incomprehensible to Ethan, but clearly providing comfort and courage to the young patients. The passage entrance is beneath that storage alcove. Eleanor indicated a section of the lodge's earthen floor, partially concealed by woven mats. It will be a tight descent, especially with the children, but once in the main tunnel, you'll have room to move upright. Ethan began moving the mats aside, revealing smooth stones that, when lifted, exposed a narrow vertical shaft descending into darkness. Cool air wafted upward, carrying the mineral scent of underground water. "You're not coming with us?" he asked, noting Eleanor's use of you rather than we. "I must remain to maintain our deception as long as possible." She handed him the small lantern and the hide map. "This shows the main tunnel system. Follow the path marked in red. It leads to a cavern with a pool, then continues to an exit in the river canyon approximately 2 miles downstream from the mesa. From there, head northeast, as Nahimana instructed you." The detailed knowledge of Apache escape routes confirmed Ethan's suspicion that Eleanor Montgomery was far more than the academic researcher she claimed to be. "Who are you really?" he asked directly. "No botanical scholar possesses this kind of information." A sad smile touched her lips. "Perhaps someday we'll have time for that conversation, Dr. Calloway. For now, know only that my interest in preserving Apache medicinal knowledge is genuine, even if my methods are unorthodox." Further discussion was interrupted by Shima's soft call. The children were ready, bundled in blankets, their essential medicines packed in small pouches, their eyes wide with a combination of fear and trust as they looked to the adults who would guide their escape. "The guards change shift at midnight," Eleanor instructed. "That's your best opportunity. I'll create a distraction then." She moved to leave, then hesitated. The northern trail Nahimana described. It leads to more than just the high sanctuary. Remember that when you reach the fork marked by 3 standing stones. With that cryptic statement, she composed herself back into the role of concerned lady visitor and departed, engaging the lieutenant and guards in animated conversation that drifted away toward the main camp. The next hours passed with excruciating slowness, each minute marked by the possibility of discovery. Ethan and Shima kept the children quiet with soft stories and sips of medicine-laced water, all while making final preparations for their descent into the unknown passages beneath the village. When midnight approached, they positioned themselves near the hidden entrance, the children wrapped in carrying slings that would allow the adults to navigate narrow passages while keeping them secure. Ethan listened intently for the changing of the guard, his hand resting on the medicine bundle Nahimana had given him, a tangible connection to her guidance that provided unexpected comfort in this moment of maximum uncertainty. Right on schedule, voices outside indicated the guard rotation. Almost simultaneously, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main camp. Shouting, running footsteps, the unmistakable sound of Eleanor's voice raised in alarm about something discovered among the Apache artifacts. The guards moved away from the lodge entrance, drawn by the disturbance. "Now," Ethan whispered, lifting the stone cover of the passage. Shima went first, her aged body displaying surprising agility as she descended into the darkness with practiced ease. Ethan handed down the girl, Dolly, secured in her carrying sling, then the boy Taklasham, before following himself with a shuttered lantern and supplies. He replaced the stone cover above them, sealing their escape route from casual discovery. The vertical shaft descended perhaps 15 feet before opening into a broader tunnel carved through the red sandstone of the mesa. When Ethan opened the lantern shutters, its light revealed a passage tall enough to stand in, its walls smooth from centuries of use and water flow. "This way," Shima indicated, her knowledge of the secret route requiring no map. She set off at a pace that balanced urgency with consideration for the children's condition. The tunnel system proved more extensive than Ethan had imagined, a network of passages, chambers, and narrower connectors that honeycombed the mesa's interior. In some sections, natural stone formations created otherworldly scenes of beauty. In others, ancient handprints and symbols decorated the walls, testament to generations of Apache who had used these hidden routes. They traveled in tense silence, broken only by the occasional whispered encouragement to the children and Shima's quiet directions at junctions. The boy, Taklashim remained alert and watchful despite his illness, while Dolly drifted between restless sleep and fever-bright wakefulness. After what seemed hours of careful progress, they reached a larger cavern where an underground spring formed a clear pool, its surface reflecting their lantern light in shimmering patterns across the stone ceiling. Here, Shima called for a brief rest, using the opportunity to check the children's condition and administer more medicine. The girl's fever rises again, she told Ethan, her gnarled fingers gentle on Dolly's forehead. Mountain journey will be hard for her. Ethan examined the child with growing concern. The exertion and stress of their escape had taxed her fragile recovery, pushing her system back toward the dangerous state they'd worked so hard to improve. Her breathing had grown more labored, her small body radiating heat despite the cool underground air. We'll need to alternate carrying her, he decided, and stop more frequently for treatment. The cooler air might help reduce the fever naturally. Shima nodded in agreement, mixing a fresh medicinal preparation from her dwindling supplies. As she worked, Ethan studied the hide map Eleanor had provided, confirming their progress against the marked route. According to the diagram, they had covered perhaps half the distance to the canyon exit, with the most challenging sections still ahead. "Who is the Montgomery woman?" Shima asked unexpectedly, her question piercing the silence. "Not friend, not enemy, something else." The assessment matched Ethan's own uncertainty about Eleanor's true nature. "She claims to be researched on Apache medicine to preserve its knowledge, but she knows too much about your people's secrets." "Knowledge hunter," Shima said, her weathered face revealing neither approval nor condemnation. "Takes without asking, but does not destroy. Better than soldiers, but still takes." It was a nuanced perspective that captured the moral ambiguity of Eleanor's position. Neither the outright destruction represented by Reed's military approach, nor the respectful exchange that true allies would practice. A third path that extracted value while leaving the source diminished yet intact. They resumed their journey after the brief rest, moving deeper into the passage system where the tunnel began a gradual descent toward the river canyon. Here the way became more challenging. Sections where water had weakened the stone, creating unstable footing and low overhangs that required careful navigation while carrying the children. The boy, Taklishim, had regained enough strength to walk short distances, clinging to Shima's hand with determination beyond his years. Dolly remained in Ethan's arms, her small body burning with renewed fever despite their treatments, her breathing a concerning rasp in the tunnel's acoustic amplification. They had nearly reached what Ethan believed to be the final stretch before the exit when disaster struck. A section of tunnel floor, weakened by centuries of water erosion, suddenly gave way beneath Shima's feet. She fell with a startled cry, pulling Taklashim with her into a lower passage, perhaps 6 feet below their path. Ethan set Dolly down carefully and rushed to the edge of the collapse, directing the lantern light into the darkness. Below, he could see the Shima struggling to sit up, her face contorted with pain, while the boy appeared shaken but largely unharmed. "Are you injured?" Ethan called down, already assessing how he might reach them. "Ankle," Shima replied through gritted teeth. "Broken, I think. Cannot climb." The situation had deteriorated from precarious to potentially fatal in an instant. With Shima injured, Dolly's condition worsening, and Reed's soldiers likely already discovering their absence, their chances of reaching the high sanctuary seemed to evaporate like morning dew in desert heat. Ethan forced himself to think methodically, as he had been trained to do in battlefield crises. First priorities: assess injuries, stabilize patients, determine available resources, establish new route if necessary. He carefully lowered himself into the collapsed section, bringing the medical bag and lantern. Taklashim huddled against Shima, his eyes wide with fear, but his young face set in determined stoicism. The old healer's ankle was indeed broken, a clean fracture of the lateral malleolus that Ethan could feel through gentle palpation. Painful and debilitating, but not immediately life-threatening. "I can splint this," he told Shima, "but you won't be able to walk normally, certainly not climb back to our original path." She nodded grimly, already understanding the implications. "New path needed. This lower tunnel also goes to river." She spoke to Taklashim in Apache, receiving a quick nod before the boy scrambled a short distance down the darkened passage, returning with a handful of stones that he arranged in a simple pattern. "He says this way connects." Shima translated. Longer route, but passable. While Ethan fashioned a splint for Shima's ankle using materials from his medical bag, Taklashim returned to the upper level via a narrow chimney in the rock that adult bodies could never navigate. The boy retrieved Dolly and the remaining supplies, demonstrating resourcefulness and courage that belied his age and recent illness. With Shima's ankle secured as well as circumstances allowed, they formed a new plan. The children would lead the way along the lower tunnel route under Shima's guidance, while Ethan supported her hobbling progress. It would be slower, riskier, but their only viable option. The lower tunnel proved narrower and less traveled than their original route, with sections where they were forced to crawl through constrictions barely wide enough for adult bodies. Shima endured the journey with stoic determination, though Ethan could see the pain etched in lines around her eyes and mouth with each movement of her injured ankle. Their progress slowed dramatically, the hours stretching as they navigated this more difficult path. Above them, Ethan knew Reed would have discovered their escape by now, perhaps already deploying search parties to the obvious exit points from the mesa. Their advantage of surprise was evaporating with each passing hour. Dolly's condition continued to deteriorate, her small body alternating between burning fever and concerning coolness, her breathing increasingly labored. Ethan administered what medicines remained in their dwindling supply, but without proper rest and care, he feared the worst outcome for the child who had fought so bravely against her illness. When they finally reached what Shima identified as the approach to the exit, gray pre-dawn light was visible ahead, a faint illumination marking the tunnel's end where it opened into the river canyon. They paused in the final section of darkness, Ethan checking both children before their emergence into the vulnerable openness beyond. Soldiers will watch all exits, Shima said, stating what they both understood. Dogs will find our scent. Ethan nodded grimly. We'll need to cross the river immediately, use the water to break the trail. He looked down at Dolly, cradled in his arms, her eyes closed and breathing shallow. But first, I need to get her temperature down. The river, cold with mountain snowmelt despite the desert climate, would help reduce the child's dangerous fever, but posed its own risks of shock and hypothermia. A delicate balance of opposing dangers that required medical judgment, honed by experience rather than textbook knowledge. They approached the tunnel exit with extreme caution, Taklashim scouting ahead with the natural stealth of his people despite his young age. The boy returned with gestures indicating the immediate area appeared clear of soldiers, though distant voices could be heard downstream. The exit emerged behind a screen of brush and boulders that provided momentary concealment as they assessed their surroundings. The river flowed perhaps 30 yards away, its surface catching the first light of dawn in silver ripples. Between their position and that potential safety lay open ground with minimal cover, a dangerous exposure they would need to cross quickly, despite Shima's injury and the children's weakness. I'll carry both children across first, Ethan decided. Then return for you, Ba. Shima shook her head firmly. No time for two crossings, soldiers too close. She produced a small knife from within her clothing, using it to cut sections from her dress that she quickly fashioned into a crude but functional sling. Carry the girl. The boy helps me. With no time to argue, they prepared for the crossing. Dolly secured against Ethan's chest, essential medicines distributed between them, the lantern abandoned as unnecessary weight. Taklashim positioned himself as a living crutch for Shima, with determination that brought unexpected moisture to Ethan's eyes. The boy who had nearly died of fever now supporting the elder who had helped save him. They moved from the tunnel's protection in a tight group, crossing the open ground as rapidly as Shima's injury permitted. Each step exposed them further, each moment stretched with the possibility of discovery. The river's edge seemed impossibly distant, then suddenly beneath their feet, the loose stones of the shore shifting treacherously as they waded into the cold current. The water's chill struck like physical pain, but Ethan pushed forward, holding Dolly high against his chest as the river deepened around his waist. Behind him, Taklashim helped Shima navigate the difficult footing, the boy's slight frame straining against the current that threatened to sweep them both downstream. They had reached mid-river when the shout came, a soldier's voice raised in discovery and alarm from somewhere along the canyon rim. Within seconds, more voices joined the first, the unmistakable sounds of pursuit echoing across the water. Keep moving, Ethan urged, though Shima needed no encouragement. They pushed through the deepest section where the current ran strongest, finally reaching the gradual slope of the opposite shore with energy nearly exhausted. As they dragged themselves from the water, rifle shots cracked through the dawn's stillness, not aimed directly at them yet, but warning fire signaling their position to other search parties. They scrambled for cover among the rocks and vegetation of the far shore, Ethan immediately checking Dolly, whose small body had been partially immersed despite his efforts to keep her above water. The cold immersion had indeed reduced her fever, but brought its own dangers of shock and exposure. He wrapped her in the driest blanket they had, rubbing her limbs to restore circulation, while Shima prepared the last of their fever medicine. Northeast, Shima reminded him, pointing toward a game trail barely visible among the rocks. 3 days to sanctuary. But the soldiers were already organizing a river crossing, their shouts carrying clearly across the water as officers directed men to positions both upstream and down. They would be surrounded within the hour unless they could break away from the immediate area and find better concealment in the higher terrain. Ethan made the most difficult decision of his medical career, whether to continue fleeing with a critically ill child whose condition required rest and careful treatment, or to surrender to superior forces who might provide better medical resources, but unknown mercy to Apache children. The oath he had taken as a physician warred with his promise to Nahimana and his growing commitment to the people who had accepted his help, despite every historical reason for distrust. As if sensing his internal conflict, Shima spoke with quiet certainty. The girl will die in soldier hands. They will not use their medicine for Apache child. The brutal truth of her assessment settled the question. They would continue northeast toward the high sanctuary and the hope of rejoining Nahimana's people, toward uncertain survival rather than certain separation and likely death. They moved away from the river with as much speed as their injuries and exhaustion permitted, using the sparse vegetation and rock formations for concealment as they ascended into more rugged terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, men shouting, horses moving along the canyon floor, the occasional baying of tracking dogs who would eventually find their scent despite the river crossing. By mid-morning, they had gained significant elevation, following game trails that wound through increasingly steep terrain. The physical toll was evident in all of them. Shima's face gray with pain from her broken ankle, Taklashum stumbling with exhaustion but refusing to slow their pace, Dolly drifting in and out of consciousness in Ethan's arms. They paused in the shadow of a large boulder, using the momentary shelter to rest and assess their situation. The pursuit had fanned out across the landscape below, methodical and relentless. From their elevated position, Ethan could see Reed himself directing operations from horseback, his distinctive uniform visible even at distance. "We cannot outrun them," Ethan acknowledged, the reality of their situation impossible to ignore. "Not with injuries and sick children." Shima nodded, her ancient eyes scanning the terrain with the assessment of generations who had survived in this harsh land. "Need help," she said simply. "Signal fire." She directed Taklashim to gather specific plants despite his exhaustion. Sage, juniper, something with red berries Ethan didn't recognize. The boy obeyed without question, returning with small armfuls of vegetation that Shima arranged with practiced hands. "Apache watch these mountains," she explained as she worked. "Signal fire tells them friends in danger. May bring help." Her weathered hands struck sparks into carefully prepared tinder, nursing a small flame that she fed with her collected plants. The fire remained small but produced a distinctive smoke, white at first, then shifting to blue-gray as Shima added different materials. The column rose straight in the still morning air, a deliberate marker that would be visible for miles. It would also, Ethan knew, immediately draw the attention of their pursuers. "How long before any help might come?" he asked, already calculating how much time they would need to buy. Shima shrugged slightly. "Depends who sees. Apache scouts watch always, but maybe far." They allowed the signal fire to burn for perhaps 5 minutes, long enough to be noticed by any tribal scouts in the area, but also long enough for soldiers to mark their position with certainty. Then they extinguished it carefully and continued their ascent, now following a steeper path that Shima indicated would lead toward a defensible position if they could reach it before their pursuers closed the distance. The next hours blurred into a haze of desperate movement, their progress slowing as terrain grew more challenging and their strength diminished. Dolly's condition stabilized somewhat, the river's cold immersion and subsequent treatments having broken her fever's dangerous peak, but she remained critically weak. Her breathing labored with each jolting step of their flight. By early afternoon, they had reached a narrow ledge overlooking a steep ravine, the trail ahead following a precipitous route that would be difficult for horses to follow. Below and behind them, the pursuit had consolidated, with at least a dozen mounted soldiers methodically closing the gap under Reed's direction. "We rest here," Shima decided, indicating a small overhang that provided minimal shelter. "Cannot go further without food. Water." Ethan eased Dolly down onto the softest ground available, checking her pulse and respiration with growing concern. The exertion of their flight had drained what little reserve she had built during treatment. Without proper rest and care soon, all their efforts might prove insufficient. Teklishem, despite his own exhaustion, disappeared briefly into the surrounding vegetation, returning with several cactus pads that he expertly sliced open to provide moisture. The boy's resilience and knowledge continued to impress Ethan, reinforcing his determination to ensure these children reached safety. They shared the meager moisture from the cacti, Ethan helping Dolly take small sips that she struggled to swallow. Their food supplies were exhausted, their medical resources nearly so. If help didn't arrive soon, physical limitations would force the decision their principals had rejected: surrender to Reed's forces. The sound of approaching horses reached them first, followed by voices calling up from the trail below. Reed himself appeared at the head of a smaller group that had outpaced the main contingent, his uniform dusty but his bearing unchanged as he reined in his mount at a switchback perhaps 100 yards below their position. "Dr. Calloway," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon stillness. "This pursuit is unnecessary. We're aware those are Apache children, not settler orphans." Ethan made no response, maintaining their concealment beneath the rocky overhang. "I'm offering terms," Reed continued after a moment. "Surrender now, and I give my word as an officer that the children will receive proper medical care. Continue this foolish flight, and I cannot guarantee their safety when my men find you." The offer held a certain temptation, the promise of medical resources beyond what they currently possessed, the end of a pursuit that was clearly unsustainable. But Ethan had seen enough of Reed's character to doubt the sincerity of his assurances, particularly regarding Apache children whose value to him likely extended only to the leverage they might provide. Shima confirmed his suspicion with a single sharp negative gesture. Her eyes, ancient with the accumulated wisdom of her people, held absolute certainty about Reed's true intentions. The silence stretched, broken finally by Reed's voice again, now harder with frustration. "You have until I count 20 to show yourselves, Doctor. After that, we proceed as with any hostile Apache." He began counting loudly, each number echoing against the canyon walls like the tolling of a judgment bell. Ethan tensed, calculating whether they might scramble further up the nearly vertical path behind them before the soldiers could adjust their position for clear shots. Reed had reached 14 when the first arrow struck the ground beside his horse, causing the animal to rear in sudden fright. Before the colonel could regain control, two more arrows followed in rapid succession, not aimed to kill, but to create confusion among the mounted soldiers, whose horses now danced nervously on the narrow trail. From positions above and around them, Apache warriors materialized like spirits from the landscape they knew intimately. Perhaps a dozen men armed with bows, rifles, and the absolute confidence of those fighting on home territory. Their faces bore the red ochre markings of war, their movements coordinated with the precision of lifelong training. The soldiers responded with predictable confusion, weapons drawn but targets unclear as the warriors maintained constant movement among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Reed shouted orders that went largely unheeded in the chaos of rearing horses and the psychological impact of being suddenly outnumbered in hostile terrain. From their sheltered position, Ethan watched the confrontation with equal measures of relief and concern. Relief at the timely arrival of help, concern that the situation could escalate into bloodshed that would only reinforce the cycle of violence between these peoples. His attention was drawn by Shima's sudden intake of breath. Following her gaze, he saw a lone figure approaching their position from above, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every handhold in the nearly vertical cliff face. As the figure drew closer, recognition dawned with a surge of emotion Ethan hadn't expected. Nahimana reached their shelter in a final graceful movement, her face showing momentary relief at finding them alive before returning to its characteristic composed determination. She knelt immediately beside Dolly, checking the child with practiced hands while speaking rapid Apache to Shima and Taklishim. "You received our signal," Ethan said, the obvious statement masking deeper emotions he wasn't prepared to examine. "We were already searching," Nahimana replied, without looking up from her examination of Dolly. "When you didn't arrive at the sanctuary by dawn, my father sent warriors back along the escape routes." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, applying a medicine from her own supplies to Dolly's chest and forehead. "The signal fire helped us locate you precisely." Below, the confrontation had reached an uneasy stalemate. The Apache warriors maintained their advantageous positions while Reed and his soldiers had withdrawn slightly, regrouping at a wider section of the trail where they could better defend their position. "The soldiers will bring reinforcements," Ethan observed. "This is only a temporary advantage." Nahimana nodded, her attention still focused primarily on the children. "We don't seek battle, only to protect our own. While they watch these warriors, we will take another path to safety." She finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that seemed to bypass words. "You kept your promise, Ethan Calloway. You protected our children when you could have chosen an easier path." The simple acknowledgement carried weight beyond its words, recognition of a trust honored, a debt repaid, a circle completed. In that moment, something shifted between them, moving beyond the cautious alliance of necessity towards something deeper that neither was prepared to name. "The girl needs immediate care beyond what we can provide here," Ethan said, redirecting focus to immediate concerns. "Her fever has broken temporarily, but her lungs remain compromised." "We have preparations that will help," Nahimana assured him. "At the high sanctuary, away from this dry dust, with proper rest and medicine, she will recover." She gestured to two warriors who had approached silently from above. "These men will carry the children. Another will help Shima. We must move quickly while the soldiers remain distracted." The evacuation proceeded with the efficiency of a people accustomed to survival under threat. The children were secured in carrying slings, Shima supported between two warriors, despite her protests that she could manage alone. Within minutes, they were moving upward along a nearly invisible path that Ethan would never have identified without guidance. As they crested the ridge and began descending into the next valley, away from Reed's forces and toward the sanctuary Nahimana had described, Ethan cast a final glance back at the confrontation still unfolding below. The tactical situation remained unchanged, a testament to the Apache warriors' skill at neutralizing superior numbers through terrain advantage. "Will your warriors be safe?" he asked Nahimana, who walked beside him with the tireless ease of someone born to this landscape. "They will withdraw when we are safely away," she explained. "Not to engage in battle, but to protect our retreat. It is our way, to fight only when necessary, to disappear when possible." The wisdom of this approach struck Ethan as profoundly sensible. Conservation of strength and lives. Strategic withdrawal rather than symbolic last stands. Survival prioritized over the hollow victories that Western military tradition too often celebrated. It was the philosophy of a people who measured success in generations rather than battles, who understood that living to fight another day represented greater courage than dying gloriously but futilely. As they moved deeper into Apache territory, away from pursuit and toward healing, Ethan felt the weight of the medicine bundle Nahimana had given him, still secure against his chest despite their arduous journey. The small pouch seemed to carry significance beyond its physical presence, a tangible connection to the path he now found himself walking. As they walked side by side toward the sanctuary, Ethan felt a connection with Nahimana that transcended their shared medical knowledge or the circumstances of their meeting. Their eyes met occasionally in silent understanding, communicating more than words could express. When their hands brushed accidentally while helping Taklishim over a difficult stretch of trail, neither pulled away immediately. It was something neither was ready to name, but both recognized as a path worth exploring, a future possibility amid the uncertainty. The healing they had performed together had created a bond that medicine alone could not explain, bridging worlds that history had set in opposition. A path that had led him from wandering purposelessly to defending children not his own. From avoiding his healing skills to embracing them in service to those his society considered enemies. From running from his past to facing it with the courage to make different choices. The red earth beneath his feet seemed to breathe with its own life and wisdom. The ancient landscape a witness to countless human struggles, yet ultimately indifferent to their outcomes. What mattered was not the temporary victories or defeats, but the integrity with which one walked the path set before them. In choosing to help these children and their people, Ethan had found something he thought lost forever. Not redemption, perhaps, but purpose. Not forgiveness, but the opportunity to begin anew. The scout also brought news of Joseph Walker. The elderly engineer had returned to his position with the railroad, maintaining a careful facade of loyalty while secretly documenting Reed's violations of government treaties and the company's unethical practices. Through an elaborate network of sympathizers, including several Army officers troubled by their role in displacing Native peoples, Walker had begun feeding information to influential newspaper editors in the East. He leaves maps with deliberate errors, Nahimana told Ethan with quiet appreciation as they walked together along the sanctuary's perimeter. The railroad surveys show impassable terrain where our best hunting grounds lie, and dangerous conditions where sacred sites remain hidden. Ethan nodded, understanding the significance of such subtle resistance. In a world of stark conflicts, Walker represented something vital, the conscience that worked within a broken system, bending its machinery toward justice rather than confronting it directly. His engineering skills, once used to extend the railroad's reach into native lands, now served to preserve pockets of independence for those who had lived there first. Small victories, Shima had remarked when she heard of Walker's efforts, her ancient eyes holding wisdom beyond words. Many small victories become large change in time. Ahead lay the high sanctuary and whatever future awaited there. Behind lay the ghosts of past failures, not forgotten but perhaps finally at rest. Days later, when they had settled at the high sanctuary, a young Apache scout brought unexpected news. Eleanor Montgomery had indeed managed to delay Reed's forces by several crucial hours. She had played her role with the conviction of Boston aristocracy, demanding military escort back to civilization with righteous indignation that even Reed could not dismiss. But her performance had consequences. Reed had placed her under military custody, suspicious of her convenient appearance at the abandoned Apache village. Yet Eleanor Montgomery was no ordinary researcher. Through her family's considerable connections with Eastern investors in the railroad, she secured not only her release but also managed to obtain copies of Reed's reports, documents that revealed the pharmaceutical company's plans to exploit Apache medicinal knowledge. These papers now made their way to sympathetic legislators in Washington, while Eleanor herself had returned to Boston with her research, not to exploit the knowledge for profit as Reed had planned, but to preserve it in a form that acknowledged its origins and respected its creators. She works in her own way, Nahimana observed when Ethan shared this news. Neither fully friend nor enemy to my people, but perhaps an ally in a different battle, one fought with papers and influence rather than arrows and guns. Ethan understood. In a world divided by culture and conquest, Eleanor had found a third path, using the system's own mechanisms to protect knowledge that the system itself sought to appropriate. Whether her motives were purely altruistic or partially self-serving, hardly mattered against the larger struggle for survival that the Apache faced. In this complex web of competing interests, even imperfect allies were valuable. And here, in this moment of transition between what had been and what might yet be, Ethan Calloway walked forward with a lighter step than he had known in years. A healer once more, and perhaps, in time, a man healed.